Hey, welcome everyone to another cube study featuring the 7th version of the starter cube by Card Kingdom. I know this video is a few days late, but I actually ended up refilming the whole thing and, kind of redesigning things, so yeah, sorry about the wait. But anyways, the starter cube, if you don't know what it is a third-party product that you can purchase off of the Card Kingdom website for about $100, and you get everything here. And again, I'm not affiliated or sponsored or anything like that. I'm just simply kind of spreading the gospel of Cube and kind of doing it for my own selfish reasons, kind of to study and learn Cube design in my own little way. But I think this is a great place to start, just to learn how to design a cube. Simply because it's about $100. You get 360 cards, various rarities. You get some decent rares, but no mythics, and 35 of each basic land, which is pretty cool because over here on the right it's an actual cutout from the Card Kingdom website, and you actually get Battle for Zendikar full art basic lands, which I think is pretty sweet, which I'll show you here in just a second. Some of the art is really cool. But anyways, you get a total of 535 cards total. It includes 2 custom Card Kingdom blue boxes, which I'm sure are just cardboard storage boxes, and you also get a full set of Ultra Pro sleeves for the whole kit, which I think is a great deal. And for me personally, I think designing your own cube is a little bit more fun, a little bit more personal, to go through your own Magic the Gathering journey and kind of collect the cards on your own and create a cube out of that. But I think right here is a great place to start for about $100 if maybe you sold your collection, or maybe that you're just starting to play Magic, or you're coming from Magic Arena and this is what you want to play on the kitchen table. But from from the top down, I think it's a great place to start, at least for learning how to make a cube, because it's not extravagantly expensive. A lot of those old school cubes, modern cube, vintage cube, or what have you, a lot of those have really expensive cards in them, and that's just not really accessible for someone who's maybe brand new to the game. But right here, I think is a great place to start for about $100 to at least examine it. If you're just starting to learn how to cube, that you don't need a lot of money to make a fun little cube draft. Just always have on the kitchen table. But anyways, let's move on into these sweet lands. Look at these full art lands. I mean, if you're getting 35 of each color, I think that's a great deal. Yeah, that's really cool. That really raises the value in my eyes, because then maybe you want to swap out the lands and put them in your own decks. I don't know, I just think it's pretty cool. But anyways, if you don't know what bread is, I'll teach you right here. This is kind of how I am labeling cards. Bread is an acronym for bombs, removal, evasion, aggro, and duds. Duds are typically cards in a normal booster draft where they're more or less cards that aren't as wanted as the other cards. But in this case with Cube, I think it's really cool because you can actually take away the duds, and you can make them into more defensive or disruptive cards, or along those lines. I think it's another way to fill in that void of the last, to replace the duds, because I don't think you want to include like vanilla creatures in your cube. If I don't know, maybe you're into that. Maybe you want to make a vanilla cube. I think that'd be pretty interesting. That'd be really crazy. But anyways, bombs are, these are the cards that are really strong threats, and if they aren't answered, then they're going to take over the game. Big flyers. Things like Ethereal Absolution from the most recent set from Ravnica Allegiance. This card is just, even though it's not a creature, it's really overwhelming in the sense that all of your creatures get +1/+1, and all of the opponent's creatures get -1/-1, and then on top of that, you can just create these 1/1 flyers for more or less infinite value going on into the late game. So that would be a bomb. Niv Mizzet over here, from Guilds of Ravnica, was a crazy card. You have that 5/5 flying body, just a ginormous creature, evasive creature, and on top of that, every time you draw, it deals 1 damage to any target. And also, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you just draw a card. I mean, that kind of power is what makes these cards bombs. And it doesn't have to be ginormous creatures. They can be early game plays as well that can really take over a game, and we'll actually see some of those here in a second. But going on to the next one is removal, and these are cards that are they kill, destroy enemy threats. That's always good to have removal in drafts. The most straightforward one is murder, and things like claustrophobia or enchantment removal, where it takes away a creature's ability to attack, for instance, or maybe it taps them and it prevents them from untapping. That's just another way to take a creature out of the game to disable them. Over here is Evasion. I'm mainly going to focus on Flying, Menace, and Unblockable to get in that damage for the aggressive decks. But also we should take a look at, or always have in the back of our mind, Pseudo Evasion, which is like Trample, First Strike, Double Strike, and Death Touch, because these are effects where usually you can get in some damage with these effects, because if you have a First Strike or a Death Touch creature, for instance, your opponent's not going to really want to trade into those because maybe they have unfavorable trades and they're just going to let that damage through. So it's kind of like pseudo evasion in a sense, but really I think the most pseudo evasive threat that's most likely to be an evasion threat is Trample, because you can get through that damage, whereas First Strike and Death Touch, for example, like a 1/1 Death Toucher, they could get traded into like a token, whereas First Strike also, if you have like a 2/2 First Striker or a 3/3 First Striker trading into a 4/4, that's not really like complete evasion, whereas Trample, it's like you're most likely going to get some damage through. So, but otherwise, the most common is Flying as far as evasion, and you always want to be getting through damage. Things like most recently like the Aeromunculus, which has been kind of a just a simple but a really effective 2/3 flyer for 3 mana that can also become later on a 3/4. Which is really solid for a 3-drop, and also from Ravnica Allegiance, the Azorius Night Arbiter, which has built-in can't be blocked. So these are cards that are evasive. And going on into the A part, which is aggro, these are cards typically found in the early game. Converted mana cost 1 through 3. Things that maybe a 1-drop going into a 2-drop. Or like burn spells, go wide strategies, even like ramp, for instance, like Llanowar Elves into a turn 3 play could be an aggressive play, and I'm also going to include some good curve toppers for these aggressive strategies. Just want to give you a heads up that there's some some cards that I'm including that aren't necessarily CMC 3 or less, just as a curve topper for these aggro decks, but. Looking at aggressive creatures like Healer's Hawk into a Sunhome Stalwarts from Guilds of Ravnica. You can put a 1/1 counter on Healer's Hawk. Going on into blue over here, Mistcloak Herald, which is in the aggressive blue decks and standard right now with the Tempo Blue, along with the Curious Obsession. Can't be blocked and also gets in that damage, draw some cards. Blue also has a lot of flyers. Black over here. I know this might be a little bit of a stretch, but the sacrifice kind of strategy can be an aggressive strategy if you can utilize these effects like Blood Artist, for example. Whenever a creature dies, it deals damage. Also, there's other creatures that have every time a creature gets sacrificed, that you can increase the stats or put a counter on them. Red over here. The red also has the goblins, like the 1-drop goblins, 2-drop goblins. Like Goblin Instigator, but also like burn spells like the Lightning Strike, of course, Lightning Bolt, Shocks, direct damage spells, along with creatures like Thermo Alchemist, which they alongside the burn spells can deal additional burn. So these are just aggressive colors, aggressive cards, and I just want to put them in monocolored just so you can see where things are going, what an aggressive strategy might look like. Llanowar Elves into a turn 2. Steel Leaf Champion, turn 1, play Llanowar Elves, turn 2, play land, and then ramp into a Steel Leaf Champion is a very aggressive play. And yeah, that's just kind of what aggro is all about, just getting off to that aggressive start. And in a normal booster draft, when you're passing around cards, almost in every set, there's going to be some cards that are what are considered duds, which are the last picks, if you will. Like on the final picks, 5 cards left in the pack. It might be some vanilla creatures, or it might be cards that have a little impact in the format. Maybe they were designed for Commander in mind, for instance, but in the draft format, they might have little impact. Things like a vanilla 3-mana 3/2, it's not very exciting. If you need it, you put it in to fill your curve, but overall, it's just not very exciting. It's just a vanilla creature. Whereas, like Font of Agonies, for instance, I think the only thing that really synergized with this in Ravnica Allegiance was a Final Payment, which was a removal spell where you could pay 5 life as an additional cost to destroy a creature. And in that case, it's just there's not a lot of going on. That there's not a lot of support for this card for Font of Agony, so it's kind of a dud. But when you're designing your own cube, you can actually remove the duds, remove these vanilla creatures or cards that aren't very good. For instance, like from Guilds of Ravnica, if you have like a surveil, something that relied on surveil, for instance, and you have no surveil cards in your cube, that could be a dud. So you want to make sure, I think, for at least for the sake of fun, to not include those duds if you can, and or maybe you want to include just like a dud only cube. That'd be kind of interesting. But anyways, I'm thinking that if you can replace it. I think it'd be really cool to replace it with instead of duds, you think of defensive cards or disruptive cards. Cards that go beyond removal spells, things like life gain or effects that can help stabilize the board. I think is a good way to think of another last thing for the D. For instead of duds, you can have like just defensive cards. And I'm also going to include a lot of counter spells in this category as well, just because I didn't know where to put them. So yeah, I just wanted to have something that I could throw counter spells in, and as well as like tempo plays. But things like life gain, for instance, like Centaur Peacemaker, each player gains 4 life. Might be counterintuitive for a aggro deck, but for a defensive deck, well, maybe you're waiting to stall the game out so you can play your late game bombs, or you just want to have some extra life to sustain that, so you can get to your end game threats. And also you get the 3/3 body, whereas Forbidding Spirit from Ravnica Allegiance is a card that prevents your opponent from just swinging in with all their creatures unless they pay 2 for each of those creatures, so that can limit their future plays. If they want to attack, they might not even attack, just so they can develop their board. It gives them that it kind of gives like a stall effect, if you will. So it's kind of a defensive creature. And also things like counter spells, unsummon. Unsummon is kind of interesting because I think it's not really a removal, but it's kind of it's tempo. They have to replay their creature. They have to replay the mana. They have to spend more mana to play that creature again. But it can be used defensively. It can be used aggressively, like in the mono blue aggro decks. Offensively, you can if they have that one blocker. You do like an unsummon tempo blink of an eye effect, and it brings it back to their hand. Or it can be used defensively. Maybe your opponent has a removal spell for one of your creatures. You can play unsummon. It's a disruptive effect where you bring back the targeted creature back into your hand, and their spell fizzles out. So I just want to include something defensive, disruptive as the last part instead of duds, as far as looking at this cube. And I'm going to open myself up to criticism. So the classifications, I'm kind of labeling all these cards, and for the sake of simplicity, I'm not trying to put them into all the categories. I'm trying to max out at 3 classifications. Again, I'm not going to be 100% accurate. I'm still kind of I'm not like a complete wizard at cube draft. I'm not like completely experienced. So feel free to comment below if you have any disagreements or any corrections. And yeah, I'm totally open to any critiques. So also, I'm going to include another kind of like throw into here, noting which version. So if the cards are listed in white, then they're from the previous version, from version 6 of the starter cube, whereas version 7 will brand new cards will be noted in this lime green. All right, so starting off with the creatures in white. We're going to start off with the Doomed Traveler. It's just a standard 1/1, but once it dies, it can become an evasive 1/1 flyer. Hazda Marshall over here promotes an aggressive go wide strategy. You can create more tokens if it and 2 other creatures attack. Healer's Hawk over here, another early game evasive threat. It has the built-in flying as well as the lifelink. Kind of a sleeper, just a really great aggressive threat in the Boros strategy from Guilds of Ravnica from the previous set. Novice Knight over here is kind of a build around, but otherwise it's just, could be used aggressively or defensively. Maybe aggressively if you have an aura-themed deck to, just go with these early drops, put on some enchantment auras, and go to town, attack really quickly, really aggressively. But it can also be used defensively, I think, because just a 1-mana 2/3 can stall up the board early in the game. Dauntless Bodyguard, another card that I classified as both aggressive and defensive. Maybe you want to, you can protect a creature that is clogging up the board, one of your big threats. just have another barrier to protect it. Whereas aggressively, it's just a 2/1, but also it can, again, protect maybe another threat later on in the game. Sky Marcher Aspirant over here can become an evasive threat as you get more creatures as you go wide, trying to become a 2/1 flyer, but otherwise it's just a regular 2/1, which is for a 1-drop is pretty aggressive. Knight of Grace, just a standard first striker for 2/2, but it can become hexproof. Becomes a 3/2 first striker, but another aggressive play. Leonin Sky Hunter over here is double white. And yeah, another evasive early game play. So as you can see here, white is getting a bunch of early game flyers, a bunch of early game 1-drops. Kind of go with the white weenie strategy. Core Skyfisher over here, another evasive, aggressive creature. Now you do have to return a permanent you control back into your hand. You can somehow make this into a positive effect if you can return a permanent that has a beneficial enter the battlefield effect, maybe something that can draw you a card, which I think in Pauper there's a Boros strategy that uses this card along with artifacts that when they enter the battlefield they draw you a card. So I think that's kind of interesting design. Also you get a solid 2/3 body for a 2-drop with built-in flying. Really good card in my opinion. Yeah, Lone Missionary over here I think can be used aggressively or defensively. You get that 2/1 body, but also you get 4 life if you're wanting to put this in your defensive deck, maybe a control deck. Silver Chase Fox over here has built-in removal against targeted enchantments. Not necessarily, creature removal, but I still wanted to label it with a removal with the R, because, maybe there's a problematic enchantment that prevents one of your creatures from attacking or whatever. Just have something built into a creature is pretty nice. Stormfront Pegasus, another 2-powered flying creature, so it's evasive and aggressive. And the Sunhome Stalwart, which promotes the aggressive strategy with the built-in Mentor as well as the first strike. If you have a 1-power creature that's attacking as well, such as the Healer's Hawk, you can put on a 1/1 counter. So another great early game play for the white decks. The Aerial Responder over here I think is interesting because it's kind of has a lot going on for it. I think it can be both aggressive and defensive as well with the flying. But also having that 3 toughness as a blocker, having that vigilance and lifelink, I think can be used in both applications. But yeah, another good early game play or a defensive play for those control decks. The Attended Knight I think is more aggressive with the built-in first strike, as well as gives you another token for the go wide strategy. Danathan Capuchin over here promotes the aura and equipment archetype. So if you are choosing equipment or auras, like with the Novice Knight, for instance, if you want to go with that route, or I think there's some other red cards down later that I'll show you that promote the aura strategy. So again, another aggressive play, but also I think can be defensive as well because it has the built-in lifelink. Can be a good early game blocker against the aggressive decks as well. So wanted to put in both. The Fiend Hunter over here I think is a new inclusion from for the version 7. It's built-in removal, but once it dies, you got to return the exiled card. Now it can only target creatures. The Pegasus Courser is an evasive, aggressive play where every time it attacks, one of your other creatures gets flying as well, and that's the same with the Rock Charger. They're pretty much identical. 1/3 bodies with flying. It also gives another attacking creature flying. And moving on to into the 4-drops in white, we have Beard, which is most definitely a defensive creature. Has the the 4 toughness. Also has that built-in kind of like stall effect where every time your opponents attack, they have to pay 1. So they have to either pay that tax, that mana tax, or they can't develop their board. They have to choose: do they want to develop their board, or do they want to attack into you? So it's kind of a defensive creature as well as having that 4 toughness. The Gallant Cavalry I think is both an aggressive and defensive play. You get the 2/2 bodies, which can help trade, stall the board, gum up the board, or it can be aggressive as well, kind of with the go wide strategy. Inspiring Unicorn is definitely a card that promotes the aggressive decks with the go wide strategy, where you have a bunch of creatures, maybe a bunch of 1/1 or 1 mana plays or 2 mana plays, fill up the board. You have 4 or 5 creatures. All of a sudden, you're swinging in for lethal. Parhelion Patrol, another evasive, aggressive curve topper, in my opinion. It's not really that great. It only has the 2 power, but the fact that it could mentor a 1-powered, maybe like a Hazda Marshal or a Healer's Hawk, I think it should be noted that it could be a good curve topper because it does have the built-in flying as well. But just having that mentor I think is pretty nice for the aggressive decks. And going on into the bombs over here for white, Bishop of Rebirth, the 3/4 body, but every time it attacks, has built-in vigilance by the way, but every time it attacks, you can return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I think this card could really easily go out of control if your opponent doesn't deal with it. It can just keep on bringing back creatures. That's pretty nice, especially if they have enter the battlefield effects. Regal Caracol over here, I wasn't sure if I wanted to put this as a bomb, but I think it is a bomb because it does end up putting 2 tokens, and those tokens each get +1/+1, so it's essentially 7 power and 7 toughness on the board, split up amongst a 3/3, a 2/2, and another 2/2 with lifelink. Those tokens have lifelink, so yeah, I definitely think it's a bomb. Even for the aggressive decks, could also be used as a board stabilizer for the defensive decks. The Stereo Angel over here, the 4/4. I think it becomes a bomb once it has that 4 power as a flying creature, has the built-in vigilance as well. So I think for 5 mana, four flyers are definitely bombs, at least in this cube. And the Venerated Loxodon, which is in my opinion, a bomb for the aggressive decks. You can convoke out with a bunch of creatures already on the board and put up +1/+1 counter. I think that's really nice if you do have that go wide strategy and you just put a bunch of +1/+1 counters, and then on top of that you get a 4/4 creature. I think that's definitely a really effective strategy for the aggressive decks. And Lena over here is another bomb for the aggressive decks if you have a ton of creatures and it just spews out a bunch of 1/1 tokens, so another effect that you can use to really go wide. The Noble Templar over here, I think it does have that built-in cycling, and I don't know, I think it's more of a defensive card with a 6 toughness. It does have the built-in vigilance, but otherwise it's just a 3 power for 6 mana. I don't know if I would classify it as an aggressive card. Maybe you put it in an aggressive deck because you could plane cycle it for a plains. So I don't know. I think it's more of a defensive card though. And Evra over here, which I would definitely consider a bomb because it has the built-in lifelink for the defensive decks, help stabilize to regain some life. Or you can go if you have, for example, full life, 20 life. And you somehow can make Evra evasive, give it flying, you can exchange your life total with Evra for 4 mana and essentially give yourself Evra's power, and Evra will get your life total as her power. So essentially, yeah, that's pretty insane to get 20 attack essentially by exchanging your life with Evra, and then on top of that, after it connects, you get that life back. So a really interesting card, really powerful if set up right, but also just with the built-in lifelink, I think is could be help stabilize you for the defensive decks. But I definitely think it's could be classified as a bomb. And for the non-creatures in white, moving on into Cloud Shift, I think this is just a disruptive spell. Helps exile, an effect that your opponent has. They have a removal. You Cloud Shift, exile target creature you control that could be the target of your opponent's removal, and then all of a sudden their spell fizzles out because it's your creature returns as a new object onto the battlefield. And on top of that, you can get new enter the battlefield effects. So if you have a nice enter the battlefield effect like draw a card or gain some life, could help out. God's Willing, I think over here is an aggressive and a defensive kind of play, where you can give one of your creatures protection from a color of your choice. So again, with the removal spell, you can fizzle it out, or you can if you're trying to get in that damage and they have a blocker of a certain color, of a monocolor, or just any color and they're multicolored, you can declare one of their colors and it can't block one of your creatures that has the protection from that color. Just because that's what protection does. And yeah, I think it can be used both aggressively and defensively. And Moment of Triumph over here, again, another aggressive/defensive card, could be used in both ways, just a nice combat trick. Also helps you gain 2 life. Moving on into Mighty Leap, this gives a creature flying. It's kind of an evasive, aggressive combat trick. Whereas, like Raise the Alarm is 2 mana for 2/1/1s. for the go wide strategy, or maybe if you're, as you'll see in black over here, there's a lot of sacrifice effects in black, so maybe you want to have some sacrifice fodder for that. The Servo Exhibition, same with the Raise the Alarm, just some 2/1/1 creature tokens. Again, as you'll see in black, there's a lot of sacrifice outlets that could benefit from this, or if you just want to stay in white, go with the go wide strategy. For example, with Pride of Conquerors over here on the right, which is a new inclusion for the 7th version of the starter cube. You can have that go wide strategy, ascend with once you reach 10 permanents, and then all of a sudden all of your creatures get +2/+2. Baffling In, another solid removal spell. Removes a target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. Pacifism, another solid removal spell. Target creature cannot, or enchanted creature can't attack or block. And Spirit Bombs over here, which is from the 6th version. We've seen it before of the starter cube, but I think I was kind of neglecting this card, but I really think it could be a bomb if I'm looking at it right, where every time a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay an additional 1, and if you do, you get a 1/1 flyer. So that's kind of every time you play a creature, you get additional value, you get another 1/1 token with flying, with the built-in evasion. I think, it could be a sleeper bomb where it can get out of control if you play early in the game. And then on top of that, you can sacrifice one of those 1/1 spirit tokens and give one of your creatures indestructible. So, I think it's kind of an early game bomb. But I'm sure some people will disagree. And Triumph of Gerard, which is one of these enchantment sagas that has the first 2 chapters, then the 3rd chapter does something a little bit extra, where that little bit extra is it gains flying. You're the target creature with the highest power gains flying, first strike, and lifelink. So I think has that evasion, aggressive, and defensive strategies. Could use it. Has the built-in lifelink. Could help stabilize. If you have a big, solid, chunky blocker, give it lifelink. You swing in for 5-6 damage, get some life back. But also could be used along with the counters for an aggressive strategy, just to give you another way to push in that damage. Moving on into the 3-mana white non-creatures, we have Invoke the Divine, which is a removal spell specifically targeting enchantments and artifacts, and you can also gain 4 life, so good for that defensive strategy. Most likely going to be used from the sideboard, probably not main deck. I don't think this cube is artifact or enchantment heavy enough, so maybe it's most likely going to see play from the sideboard, but you never know. If you want to later modify it to be more artifacts heavy, it might be a main deckable card. Battle Mastery over here is an aggressive enchantment aura where you can enchant a creature, give it double strike, so that'd be really good with flyers, for instance. But yeah, along with Danitha, could help promote that enchantment aura equipment strategy for that archetype. Lightform over here, previously I think I kind of neglected these manifest cards, and the more I read it, and this is the second time that I've come across it, the first time being this cube study over the 6th version of the starter cube, but looking at this looking at another time, I think it's a pretty good card that could be used both aggressively and defensively. Has that flying lifelink. And then on top of that, you can, if it is a creature card, you could flip it up at any time. So you can maybe get a favorable trade if it's a big creature, for instance, or maybe it's like a death touch creature. But otherwise, it's just a 2/2 flying lifelink, which is pretty solid for a 3-mana play. And Luminous Bonds, which is another removal spell, which prevents a creature from attacking or blocking. Moving on into the 4-mana plays, again with the 2/2 creatures, I think it could be used aggressively with the go wide strategies, or just have some blocking fodder for the defensive strategies. The Conclave Tribunal over here is another solid removal spell, just exile target non-land permanent, and you can also convoke it if you are going the aggressive go wide strategy. You can convoke your creatures to help cast it. Captured by the Consulate is a new card that we're seeing for the version 7, but essentially it's just an enchantment where it prevents target creature from attacking, and if your opponent happens to play a single target spell, maybe like a lightning bolt, it targets that creature. So kind of an interesting twist on their future plays. On Sarah's Wings over here is another evasive, gives built-in flying on the enchantment aura, and it could be used aggressively if you're trying to push in that damage, or defensively because it has the built-in lifelink, so it could help stabilize you if you have a big creature, for instance, get some life back. And now we're moving into the board wipes. So Planar Outburst over here, destroy all non-land creatures. It's a solid 5 mana board wipe to destroy, the whole board. It also has a built-in Awaken 4, which for 8 mana, you can cast it for 8 and put 4 1/1 counters on target land. So another way to get a threat onto the battlefield. Another way to, have, for the defensive strategies, get a 4/4 blocker. Akuma's Vengeance, another destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments effect. Kind of a reset button for the cube. For anytime you're looking for a board wipe, this would be a really good one. Hopefully you don't have too many artifacts or enchantments of your own, because then it'd be susceptible to friendly fire to this effect. But otherwise, destroy all artifacts, creatures, enchantments. Just a good reset button for the whole game. Besides lands. But otherwise, if you're ahead on board, maybe you don't want to use this effect, you can just cycle it, discard it, draw out another card. And then Sudden Disappearance over here is kind of interesting because it exiles all of your opponent's non-land permanents, and then at the beginning of the next end step, they come back. So once they come back, they do get their end of the battlefield effects again, but this could be useful if you're later in the game. It's a board stall, you have a well-developed board, and then all of a sudden you Sudden Disappearance of their board. Now they have no blockers, and you can just swing in. So kind of an interesting effect in that sense. Or you could use it for your own self, I guess, if you have a ton in some kind of like unique way where your board has a bunch of all of your creatures have a bunch of enter the battlefield effects. You can exile all of your creatures and they come back at the beginning of your next end step. It is sorcery speed though, so it is kind of clunky. But if you have, I don't know, a lot of maybe gain a bunch of life. I really don't know. You're probably most likely going to use this offensively, though, against your opponent, just so they have no blockers to block with. So you can push in a bunch of damage. Alright, so pushing forth into the blue creatures. The blue section for creatures is a little bit more, like there's not as much creatures. I think you're going to see a lot more blue spells, non-creature spells. But as far as creatures, we do have some evasive early game plays, such as the Departed Deckhand, which can be blocked except by spirits. And you could also, use it's a built-in activated ability for 4 mana to give one of your other creatures unblockability except by spirits as well. Mystic Archaeologist, you get a solid, 2/1 body. And I think it can be used both aggressively and defensively. Later on in the game, it can give you some card advantage. Night Veil Sprite over here is an evasive early game play. It just pings in for that 1 damage, flying evasive threat, but also gives you that built-in surveil, which is pretty nice. You can help filter out your early game plays. Or maybe you want to have some bodies in the graveyard. I don't know, maybe you have like some kind of crazy Soul Tide deck with blue, green, and black. You have that Golgari graveyard strategy, relying on creatures in the graveyard. I don't know. Could be interesting. But Omen Speaker over here, another, it has that 1/3 body, so it's a defensive threat, but it can help, it has that built-in scry, where you can help kind of filter out your early game plays, kind of see what route you want to go, whether you want to bottom or top those cards. The Valdalian Arcanist, another 1/3 body, so more of a defensive kind of slow card, but it can help ramp up bigger spells. The Dreamscape Artist, this card, you have to discard a card and sacrifice a land, but you can tap that land beforehand to get some of that mana, and then before you sacrifice it, and then after that you search your library for up to 2 basic lands. You can put them into play untapped. So, just kind of interesting effect to, I think it's not really an aggressive thing, aggressive creature because it's, 2 mana 1/1. But, for the defensive plays, maybe you're trying to ramp out into something to trying to develop your board or your mana base. The Jeskai Infiltrator over here is kind of interesting. I don't think he's as aggressive as I think. He does have the built-in evasion where he can be blocked as long as you control no other creatures. That's why I don't think he's that. He's not really. You have to have no other creatures to get the unblockability. So he does have the evasive threat, but it's kind of interesting because I'm not really sure how to classify it. Is it an aggressive card or is it defensive? Has that 3 toughness but 2 powered body. But once it deals combat damage to a player, you exile this card, the Jeskai Infiltrator, as well as the top card of your library face down. Both of them into, you have to shuffle them, kind of randomize it so your opponent doesn't know, and they're manifested into 2/2 creatures face down, and then later on you can turn them face up anytime for their mana cost if they're creature cards. So kind of interesting, trying to manifest the cards creates a unique playstyle, but I'm not really sure if that's an aggressive card. Maybe it is. I don't know. Kind of a weird, wonky card. So I put it in the defensive category because you have to have no other to get the unblockability. You have to have no other creatures. So you play it, and then you have no other creatures, and then it swings in, and then all of a sudden you have two bodies that are manifested into face down morph creatures essentially, and that could be turned face up at any time. So it's kind of an interesting effect. I don't really know if it's an aggressive card. So, but yeah, that's a new card in the 7th version. But another card that we've seen before in the previous versions, the 6th version, is Eldrazi Sky Spawner. It's an evasive, aggressive, and a defensive play in my opinion, because you get that built-in 2/1 flyer for 3 mana. You get a 2-power flyer. But on top of that, once it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 body, and that 1/1 body could be used as kind of a ramp, where you have to sacrifice the token in order to get 1 colorless mana. So, kind of an interesting card in itself. I think it can be used both aggressively and defensively. The Wall of Frost, I think, is mainly a defensive creature because it has a 7 power, and on top of that, every time it blocks, that creature doesn't untap after it's blocked. So, definitely a defensive card being a defender. Mirror Image over here, it's kind of an amoeba because it enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control. So if it's a defensive creature or if it's an aggressive creature. Now if it hasn't entered the battlefield effect, could be interesting. For example, with the Eldrazi Sky Spawner, you get another effect. Or you typically want to most likely copy your biggest creature, most likely with this card. But maybe you can pull off some shenanigans with enter the battlefield effects with Mirror Image. I don't know. That's why I just kept it as like kind of a variable card as an X. It could be used defensively. It can be used aggressively. It's really up to what you have it for in your deck when you draft it. The Seagate Oracle over here is a 1/3 body for 3 mana, so it's not really an aggressive stat line, but you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. It kind of filters itself out. It replaces itself. So, but it does have that 1 power for a 3 mana body, so I didn't want to put it aggressively, but it does have that 3 toughness, so I put it in the defensive category as far as creatures go. Moving on into the 4 mana plays in blue. Archaeomancer, again, 4 mana for a 1/2 is a really poor stat line, but, variably, depends on what instants and sorceries you have in your deck. If you have a burn heavy deck, it could be used aggressively to get another lightning strike, for instance, or another burn spell, or it could be used defensively. Maybe you have another removal spell. So, just kind of a flexible card. Niblis of Frost over here, I think, is definitely a bomb because it has the built-in flying and it has the prowess ability where every time you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1. So if you have a bunch of combat tricks, 1 mana combat tricks, you can really pump this guy up. Or you can even use it defensively where every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you tap a target creature one of your opponent an opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during their untap step. So could be used aggressively, could be used defensively, but I definitely think it's a bomb because it does have that prowess built in along with the flying, so it can push in that damage. Murmuring Mystic over here, I think, is another bomb, even though it doesn't look like it. Look from Guilds of Ravnica, having a bunch of spells, just getting these 1/1 flyers. It doesn't look like much, but I definitely think it's a bomb. With the 1/5 body, it just clogs up the board, but once it's built around, you have a bunch of instants and sorceries, just starting to create that value every time you cast an instant or sorcery. I don't know. I think it doesn't look like a bomb, but it's definitely a bomb in my opinion. Just from looking at all of the past Guilds of Ravnica drafts, I definitely think Murmuring Mystic is kind of a sleeper. In Towergeist over here is another one of those, it's a 4 mana 2/2, but it does, you look at the top 2 cards of your library and you put one of them into your hand and another one into your graveyard. So it does replace itself. You get a 2/2 body. An evasive threat, but I think it can be used both aggressively and defensively because, you do get that built-in 2/2, but, it does replace itself, so I think it's just a solid value card. Mnemonic Wall over here is another card that return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, but because it is a 0/4 defender for 5 mana, definitely think it's a defensive kind of creature. The Djinn of Wishes, I think, is a solid bomb because you get a 4/4 body with the flying for 5 mana. And once you get, for 4 power with the flying, I think is when it's considered a bomb, at least in my opinion, at least for this cube. I'm sure everyone's definition of a bomb is different, but for this cube, just getting that extra value with the 3 wish counters, and you can remove a wish counter and play a card from the top of your library without paying its mana cost. Just so much value, along with evasive threat, 4 power evasive threat. I definitely think it's a bomb. That's a new inclusion for version 7. Another new inclusion is Sage Eye Avengers, which is a 6 mana play. It doesn't have built-in evasion, but it does have a 4/5 body, so 4 power, none to scoff at, with prowess, so every time you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1. Again, another one of those cards that can really benefit from, instant sorceries, non-creature spells like artifacts. And every time it attacks, you return target creature back into its owner's hand if its power is less than its own. So this can be used aggressively. Your opponent has a blocker. Once you attack, it triggers. You can return that single blocker. Or it can be used, if you have synergy with an enter the battlefield effect of your own on your side of the board. You can return it back into your hand and, replay it. So, can create some dynamic plays, I think. But I definitely think it's a bomb simply because if you do have a bunch of non-creature spells, you can really utilize that prowess to get some favorable trades along with that 5 toughness. I definitely think it can, if you have a combat trick that gives like +2/+2 to it, the prowess will trigger and then it gets another +1/+1, so it becomes a 7/8. So you can definitely get some favorable trades. Definitely think it's a bomb though because it's so dynamic with the prowess, as well as every time it attacks, you can return a target creature, your own or your opponent, as long as its power is less than its own. But anyways, moving on into Shoreland Ranger, which is has a 3/4 body. It is 6 mana. It does have the evasive, built-in flying, but I'm not really sure if I would consider it a bomb. It's a 3/4. It doesn't reach that 4 power for a flying creature. But, it's a solid aggressive or defensive play, in my opinion, because you can cycle it for a land. So if you want to build up your mana, or, just having another card that's kind of flexible where you can cycle it, or later on in the game you draw it later on, you can have a 3/4 flyer. So I wasn't really sure. I said, why not include it for both aggressive or defensively? Even though in an aggressive strategy it is kind of slow because, even cycling it, you have to spend your 2 mana as well as discard it. But I don't know. I think it can be used for both just because, it does have that built-in flying. The Sphinx of Uthun, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a 7 mana play. So, for 7 mana, you better get something good, right? Well, in this case, you're going to get a bomb, in my opinion, because you get a 5/6 flyer, which is really, really solid. Really good stat line. Probably going to be the biggest creature on the battlefield. There's only a few that, in green that outclass its size. But as far as its effect, every time it enters the battlefield, so it's an enter the battlefield effect, you can reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and your opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. So, of course, it gives them the power, but, you actually get to choose which one you want to put into your hand. So if they split the 5 cards into a 3/2 pile, you can choose between those, or if it's a 4/1, either way you get to choose. So I don't know, it creates a kind of a unique wrinkle into the gameplay. But as far as, you're definitely going to get some cards out of it, and on top of that, you get a 5/6 flyer, so I would definitely consider it a bomb. And moving on into the non-creature spells in blue. So as you can see here, a lot more non-creature spells than creatures. And we're going to see a lot of, tempo plays. Diminish I would consider a removal spell just because it shrinks a creature down into a 1/1 so you can get favorable trades. Opt over here is, it can be used both aggressively and defensively, I think. You scry 1, draw a card. I think any deck can really use that filtering. Unsummon and Silent Departure, both are return target creature back into its owner's hand. Silent Departure is sorcery speed, but it does have the built-in flashback, so you can use it twice. Whereas Unsummon is an instant speed, so you can use it defensively. But for Silent Departure, I still want to put it defensively because maybe you want it to return a target creature. Maybe you have a creature that that gives you some life, so you can return it back into your hand, play it, regain some more life, or I don't know. I'm sure there's some creative plays they can use with it, even though it is sorcery speed. But aggressively, of course, you can. Your opponent has one blocker. You return it back into their hand. Kind of a tempo loss. They got to recast it. Again, a bunch of other cards that are I think could be used for both aggressive and defensive decks. Anticipate and Impulse are both, look at the top, 3 or 4 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. Now, of course, it could be said that, an aggressive deck would want to have another aggressive threat, but I still think these cards are kind of useful if you are going, for example, if you have a card that utilizes casting spells like Murmuring Mystic or Electrostatic Field, where every time you cast a spell, something happens, you can deal additional damage, or you get a 1/1 flying creature. So I just want to include it for the aggressive decks in that sense. But typically these kind of effects are a little bit slower, so I'd put them more in the defensive category. And of course, there's a bunch of counter spells like Disdainful Stroke, Essence Scatter, Mana Leak, Negate. All of these counter spells in some fashion, and for the control decks, you want to have that disruptive defensive strategy for your control deck. This is another wrinkle that you can throw at your opponents. Just having some counter spells, definitely. You want to stall the game out. Your opponent plays a big creature, you Essence Scatter it, or you Disdainful Stroke it. And moving on to like Blink of an Eye. And this is another one of those return target non-land permanent, back into its owner's hand. You can use it at instant speed. You can also kick it as well, so you can replace it, for an additional 2 mana, so you can draw another card. But it's very flexible. You can use it aggressively. You can use it defensively. Opponent casts a removal on one of your creatures. You can bounce it back into your hand, protect it, recast it. Radical Idea and Think Twice. Again, not inherently cards that are put into aggressive decks, but if you do have the aggressive strategy of like Electrostatic Field or some kind of Murmuring Mystic where it procs off of non-creature spells, instant sorceries, I just wanted to include it there. But these kind of effects are they're not creatures and they're not really inherently aggressive, but in those senses, I just want to put in the aggressive because you do get to draw a card, get the benefit of casting an instant. Think Twice, you don't have to jumpstart it by discarding a card. You just straight up flashback it with mana. Think Twice, you can get an additional card. Whereas Radical Idea is, you have to play the card in order for it to filter itself out, and then you have to discard another card. So you're not really netting additional cards. Whereas Think Twice, you do eventually net one card. But anyways, moving on to Metamorphic Alteration. This is another one of those dynamic cards where it depends on what creature you choose. Your opponent has a big creature. You could choose. You're most definitely going to want to copy the biggest creature on the board. So, whether it's your own or your opponent's, it's a kind of a dynamic card. That's why I put the X. It could be used aggressively, defensively. Maybe you are trying to stall the board. You want to copy one of your own big creatures or one of those big defenders. Could be used in that sense if you're trying to stall. But most likely you're going to play the biggest creature on the board. Moving on into more counterspells. Cancel, Supreme Will. These are spells that are inherently defensive and disruptive. Unwind, another counterspell. Ghostly Flicker over here is one of those flicker spells where it exiles 2 target artifacts, creatures, or lands, and then you return those cards back to the battlefield under your control. So you have to protect 2 creatures. Maybe they're about to get targeted by a removal spell. Again, you could flicker them, and it re-triggers their end of the battlefield effects. Tragic Lesson over here is draw 2 cards, and then you have to discard a card unless you return a land you control back into your hand. Just another one of those cards where I think can be used both aggressively or defensively. Just getting 2 cards. It's kind of like a divination. Cloud Form over here, I actually consider it a bomb because a flying hexproof threat for 3 mana early in the game I think is kind of out of control, especially if it does become, I mean, if you do manifest a creature card, it comes down as a 2/2. You know, right then and there, face down, it's a 2/2 hexproof flyer, but you know, if it turns out to be a big creature, you know, for example, if it has like 4 power, then all of a sudden it's a 4 power flying hexproof creature, which I think is pretty crazy. So I think it's low key a bomb because it's going to be a very difficult threat, and it can just keep on plugging away for damage. Can't get removed as easily against removal. Your opponent has to have a flyer or some kind of reach to block it. And again, if it's a big creature that you happen to manifest, you could flip it at any time for its mana cost. I don't know. The more I look at these manifest cards, the more I think, you know, they're kind of, you know, interesting as far as what kind of plays you can do on the battlefield. So I think Cloud Form, my opinion, being hexproof and flying as early as 3 mana, as of 2/2 at its worst. At its best, it can be like a 5/5 hexproof flyer. I think it definitely can be a low key bomb. Deep Freeze over here is just a, you know, a blue removal spell because you know, it effectively you know, negates a creature back into, you know, it loses all of its abilities and it just becomes a 0/4 defender, so it can't attack. And Bone to Ash over here, it's a really heavy 4 mana counterspell, and typically with counterspells, it's very, very tricky because in draft, you typically want to curve out and play all of your threats and not leave any mana up. And if you do leave mana up and they, for instance, play, you know, they don't play a big creature, your Bone to Ash isn't as effective. For instance, if you're going against a mono white weenie or like a mono red deck, a very aggressive deck, and they're only playing like really small creatures, your Bone to Ash isn't going to do much because it's a 4 mana counterspell, and you're kind of anticipating to counter a big creature. But, you know, counter target creature spell with the built-in card draw. 4 mana counter spells are kind of iffy, but in my cube, I run some, but you know, you get like a 2/2 creature or a 1/1 flyer in those cases, the ones that I'm running. But in this case, you know, Bone to Ash, draw a card. 4 mana counter spells are really iffy, but in this case, you know, for the blue strategy, I think it's, you know, another defensive spell. But yeah, just 4 mana counter spells are always kind of iffy when you're drafting them. You have to think if you really want to play them. Chemist's Insight, again, another one of those cards where, you know, it eventually nets you, well, on its first half, it does net you 1 card, and then you can jumpstart by discarding another card. So I think, what is it? It's 2 cards for 4 cards, so it nets you overall 2. Yeah, I think it could be used both aggressively and defensively, kind of refill your hand in the aggressive strategies, or, you know, most obviously in the defensive strategy, you want to have that card advantage. You want to accumulate card advantage. Hieroglyphic Illumination, another one of those cards where, you know, it's just another draw card, or if it's early in the game, you can just cycle it, discard this card and draw another card, and maybe you're looking for a land. Skyway's Teachings, this card is a new occlusion, but, you know, it does promote the non-creature strategy where, you know, you do have to pay 2 mana, 1 colorless and 1 blue, but you know, you do get these 2/2 flyers, and as an enchantment, it's a 4 mana enchantment though, so I'm not really sure if it's a bomb, especially since you have to, you know, build around it, have a bunch of non-creatures as well as pay the 2 mana. But just getting the extra value every time you do cast a non-creature spell, you know, have the built-in evasion. I think it could be used aggressively and defensively. You know, having those 2/2 flyers. It really depends on the deck though. So, but it's probably not inherently an aggressive card. Because, you know, in an aggro deck, you want to have a bunch of early game plays, and I'm not sure if you want to flood out with a bunch of non-creature spells, but if it's like an aggro burn deck, maybe could be an aggressive card, but, you know, just getting some extra value with the 2/2 flyers. Time of Ice, definitely a defensive card because you tap, you know, with the first chapter as well as the second chapter, target creature an opponent controls, it doesn't untap as long as the spell is on the field, and then on its third chapter, you return all tapped creatures back into their owner's hand. So definitely a stall effect, kind of prevent the biggest creature from attacking into you. Moving on into the 5 mana non-creatures for blue. Again, another one of those card draw spells. This one's straight up draw 4 cards. So it replaces itself. You net 3 more cards. Again, I think it could be used both aggressively and defensively. Aggressively for the, you flood out all of your creatures early in the game, and then, you refill your hand and have more threats. Or defensively, where you can just obviously accumulate a lot of cards. Primordial Mist over here, I actually think is a low-key bomb because I think it could get out of control because every time at the beginning of your end step you manifest the top card of your library, it becomes a face-down 2/2 creature. And if it does so happen to be a creature spell, when you look at it, you can flip it up at any time. So maybe if it's one of your big bombs, like a 5/5 creature, for instance, and it's face down as a 2/2, you can turn it up face up at any time for its mana cost and get a favorable trade before blocks. So it's kind of interesting in that sense. It is 5 mana, but the fact that you manifest every time at the beginning of your end step could be a lot of value in this card. And it could, just be an overall good defensive card because you are creating those extra value creatures just from the top of your deck. If it's a land card, for instance, it's a 2/2 creature that's help blocking for you. And you can exile a face-down permanent you control face up. You may play that card this turn. So if it's like an instant or sorcery, face down permanent. So yeah, if it's a face down, yeah, I assume it's if it's a face down, 2/2 as an instant, you can exile it and then permanent you control face up. You may play So I think that's just a wording to essentially play a instant and sorcery that was previously a permanent manifested as a 2/2 creature. I'm not 100% sure on the rulings of that. I haven't actually had any experience with manifest cards, but that's how I assume it works. But overall, though, if I'm reading the card right, I think it's definitely a bomb because you can accumulate that card advantage for you, and you can potentially get some really favorable trades if you so happen to manifest one of your creature cards, one of your bigger creatures, as a 2/2 creature, and then your opponent attacks into it. Flips up as a 5/5 flyer or whatever, a 5/5 creature, and you could get a favorable trade. So that was a lot of rambling on about Primordial Mist, but I think it's a low-key sleeper bomb. I decided to throw in the dynamic costed, variable costed Entrancing Melody as well as Syncopate towards the end over here, just because for example with Entrancing Melody, if you want to take an opponent's 6 mana or 5 mana creature, you're gonna have to spend 7-8 mana to use it. Whereas Syncopate, you're gonna have to leave a lot of mana up. Towards the later game, earlier in the game, it's a lot better because if they curve out and they spend all of their mana, Syncopate, you could play it for less. Whereas later on in the game, where both players have a bunch of mana up, have a lot more mana, have access to a lot more mana, you're gonna have a lot more mana up in order to effectively negate their spell. But anyways, Supplant Form, this is a tempo play with an instant speed for 6 mana. Return target creature back into its owner's hand. Could be used for your own creature or your opponent's creature, but you essentially create a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. So, copy the biggest threat, or, you can copy and enter the battlefield effect. In Bolus's Clutches, I would consider a bomb. Why I would consider this one a bomb over Entrancing Melody, I think Entrancing Melody, because it is a dynamic spell where, if you're trying to take your opponent's biggest creature, you're going to have to spend a lot more mana, whereas, in Bolus's Clutches, it's just a 6 solid, 6 mana, boom, take your creature, or take enchanted permanent. There's no planeswalkers, so you're mainly going to be using this against big creatures, but it's just 6 mana, boom, take control of the opposing enemy biggest creature, and all of a sudden you have a 2-for-1 because your opponent has to deal with it now. So yeah, that's the end of blue non-creatures. Alright, so getting into the black creatures, we have a creature count of 32. So we're going to see a lot of aggressive plays, things like Diagraph Ghoul, 2/2 body for 1 mana, Festering Mummy, when it dies, put a -1 counter, so could be removal, a ping effect against a 1 toughness creature. Also good for the Sacrifice Fodder deck. Pilfering Imp over here has built-in flying as a 1/1 early game aggressive play. That can also be used defensively as well, if you're more of a control deck, where you can just sacrifice it, and take a non-land card and they have to discard it. Tenacious Dead and Sanitarium Skeleton are very similar in the sense that they're recursive. Once they die, in the case of Tenacious Dead, you have to pay 2 mana to return it. Whereas Sanitarium Skeleton, you don't have to do it immediately. You can wait later on in the game and return it from your graveyard to your hand. Tenacious Dead does come onto the battlefield though, which is pretty nice. So these are good for like the sacrifice fodder deck, but also defensively if you want to have just kind of like a chump blocker that has a lot of value, where it can consistently chump block, kind of gum up the ground. So I think it could be used in both senses. But Typhoid Rats and Hired Poisoner both have Death Touch. They're just 1/1s. Good for the aggressive black decks, or as a defensive 1/1 Death Toucher that's clogging up the ground. Burglar Rat over here. Once it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, comes down as a 1/1 body. For the sacrifice deck, along with Dusk Legion Zealot, they come, once after they've done their job of entering the battlefield and triggering an effect. Dusk Legion Zealot kind of does the opposite of Burglar Rat, where you draw a card but you lose 1 life, whereas Burglar Rat, your opponent has to discard a card. In both cases they come down as a 1/1, so they've done their job and you can just sacrifice them, have an extra body. But other things like Carrier Thrall, once it dies, leaves a 1/1 token that can later be sacrificed to add mana, or just as a 1/1 creature token. You can just use it as sacrifice fodder for another effect. Doom Dissenter, once it dies, also leaves another body that could also be used as fodder. So in this black sacrifice archetype, we're going to see a lot of creatures that have extra value once they die. Things like Reassembling Skeleton, once it dies from the graveyard, it can be returned to the battlefield, tapped, so that constant recursion where you don't have to sacrifice your best creature or anything. You can sacrifice a Reassembling Skeleton and kind of get that infinite value. Or Scrap Heap Scrounger, even though you do have to exile a card from your graveyard for it to recur, it's still really nice because, most likely it's going to be used as a 3/2 for 2 mana as an aggressive early game drop, but maybe potentially later on in the game it can't really attack, and you can use it as sacrifice fodder where you can constantly bring it back. Child of the Night over here, it's a good early game play for the aggressive decks, being just a 2 power creature, but also has that lifelink for if you're a defensive kind of slow deck, a grindy deck, you need that lifelink to kind of sustain yourself or try and block early in the game. Knight of Malice over here has 2/2 first strike, and also has the bonus upside against a white where it has hexproof against white, and it can also get +1 power if any player controls a white permanent. So most likely going to be used as an aggressive early game play, being a 2/2 first striker as potential upside. But now we're going to be getting into the sacrifice outlets, or the sacrifice payoffs. So the Bloodflow Connoisseur, for no mana, you can just, at any speed, at instant speed, you can sacrifice a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodflow Connoisseur. So again, you want to have, like token fodder or cards that recur, things like Reassembling Skeleton, where you can really, kind of chain and get this card to grow out of control, because these are counters. But also, in the case of Ravenous Harpy, all the way on the far right over here, it's kind of similar to Bloodflow Connoisseur, but has the built-in flying, so it has that built-in evasion, which is really nice. Also, it has 1 extra toughness to boot, but in order to get the +1/+1 counter, you have to pay 1 mana. So the cool thing about Bloodflow Connoisseur, even though it doesn't have the flying, and it comes down a little bit weaker, the fact that you don't have to invest extra mana could be an upside, whereas Ravenous Harpy, if you have 4 or 5 creature tokens, you have to spend 4 or 5 mana to sacrifice all of them to put all those counters, whereas Bloodflow Connoisseur at instant speed with the no mana up, you can just sacrifice creatures and put +1/+1 counters on Bloodflow Connoisseur. And in the same vein with Phyrexian Ghoul and Vampire Aristocrat, in the same sense, they can just at instant speed, without paying extra mana, just sacrifice a creature, which typically would be a downside, but if you can focus on those 1/1 tokens or If you can use something like a reassembling skeleton, anything that has recursion that you can bring back, just the ability to pump these up, have built-in combat tricks is really nice, get favorable trades, or your opponent's going to be very hesitant to block into these creatures because you can sacrifice a creature at any time and pump them up and get favorable trades in that sense. So or you just push in damage. They go unblocked and just push in that extra damage. So Skymarch Bloodletter, just a good solid 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. Good solid rate for an evasive creature, early game creature that can start pinging in for damage. Also has a built-in enter the battlefield effect where your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And Vengeful Rebel over here, which for a 3 power for 3 mana is pretty good. As a 3/2, kind of as a vanilla test, but has an additional upside where it can revolt, where once it enters the battlefield, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3, so you can ping off 3 toughness opposing creatures, but it does require that a permanent you controlled left the battlefield. So. But having that built-in removal, on your second main phase after you swung in, one of your creatures got blocked and got traded, you can finish them off with the Vengeful Rebel. So, pretty cool. And moving on into more payoffs for the Sacrifice deck, I actually think Vulcanwrath Noble is kind of a bomb. Might be debatable if it's a bomb just because it's a 2/2 flyer for 4, it's kind of but the effect is where it's kind of like a Blood Artist where you get the, anytime it dies or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, if you can abuse all those sacrifice outlets along with sacrifice fodder, have that nice synergy of cards that can recur, come back after they have been sacrificed, kind of go really in the long game, kind of go a lot of value, infinite value, the Vulcanwrath Noble could really be a great payoff for the sacrifice archetype in black right here. Fell Spectre, it's a 4 mana 1/3 body, which is kind of a poor rate. It does have flying though, but I put in the aggressive strategy, an aggressive label on it because your opponent does have to discard a card, and they do lose 2 life once they discard a card, or anytime they discard a card. So along with Burglar Rat or Pilfering Imp, maybe you can build a discard strategy. I don't know, kind of like a Dimir maybe kind of strategy where you make them discard their cards. Gravedigger over here, just 4 mana. I think could be used both aggressively and defensively, depending on what creature you get. But it comes down as a 2/2 body, so you can get an early game play that died, or as a defensive deck, you can get your big blocker that maybe was removed from a spell or something. So could be used both ways. Whisper Blood Liturgist over here. She's kind of a slow, kind of clunky, does require 1 extra turn because it is a tap ability, so it doesn't have haste or anything, but it does require some setup where you have to sacrifice 2 creatures. It's a pretty heavy cost. Sacrificing 1 creature enough is usually a pretty big cost, but sacrificing 2 creatures, now that's some next level payment, but you do get a good payoff where you can return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you can maybe get maybe somehow you pitched a big creature earlier in the game, maybe with like a cycling ability or something, or like a tormenting voice or whatever, where you pitch a big creature and now it's in your graveyard. Whisper over here, it does require some setup, but could potentially get that big bomb from your graveyard onto the battlefield. So yeah, kind of a cool build around, another payoff for the Sacrifice deck. Smothering Abomination over here I think is a bomb because you get the 4 power with the flying at 4 mana. That's a really good rate. It's an evasive, aggressive threat. There is kind of, in the Sacrifice deck, I don't think it's a downside, but it could be a downside if you run out of creatures. You do have to feed this creature over and over because it's not a May ability. You have to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep, but whenever you do, you draw a card. So in the Sacrifice deck, it's actually really good because you're going to be sacrificing a lot. Anyways, with these recursive threats like a reassembling skeleton or what have you, or creatures that die and they leave a token. So you can essentially sacrifice 2 creatures to 1 card, have that kind of value in that sense, and then on top of that you draw a card every time you sacrifice. So kind of a cool payoff for the Sacrifice deck, along with being a flyer. Also know that it's devoid, it has no colors, so that could potentially, later on, as you'll see in red, there's the Goblin Crater Maker, which can blow this up, which is kind of interesting. But 4 power flyer is pretty good. Here's some more sacrifice payoffs in the sense of going that way of the sacrifice archetype, you want to have good payoffs. And Phyrexian Plague Lord, again, you don't have to invest extra mana. You just have to sacrifice a creature, and target creature gets -1, -1. So if you have a bunch of sacrifice fodder, a bunch of tokens, a bunch of 1/1 tokens or what have you, you can just sacrifice all of them and start pinging off opposing creatures. As a last resort, you can even sacrifice itself to destroy a 4 toughness creature. So in my opinion, I would consider it a bomb because it can really affect the board state and really swing things in your favor. It has the built-in removal, and on top of that, it's a 4/4 body to boot, so it can clog up the ground or swing in for 4 damage. So I definitely think it's a bomb in the sacrifice archetype for black. Priest of the Bloodright is definitely a bomb because as 5 mana for a 2/2 is really poor, but its enter the battlefield effect is insane. It's a 5/5 flying demon token. So if you can somehow find a way to, in the black archetype of sacrifice, for instance, play Priest of the Bloodright and then find a way to sacrifice it, because it does have a downside where at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 2 life. So if you can find a way to sacrifice the Blood Priest after it has summoned its demon, it's done its job, you can throw it to the pit, throw it to the graveyard, sacrifice it, get some bonus upside for the sacrifice, and now it's in the graveyard. Now, if you use something like Whisper, Blood Liturgist, get it back. Now you get another 5/5 flying token back onto the battlefield once it enters from the graveyard to the battlefield. So, and then you can use it as another sacrifice outlet because it leaves a 2/2 body behind. It's done its job of bringing that 5/5 flying. So it's kind of masochistic, but this Priest of the Bloodright. I mean, look, he's like in this candle sacrifice thing, so he's meant to do this. So but yeah, that's another good bomb, being a 5/5 flyer for the sacrifice archetype. And then over here is awesome. It's Yargle. It's a 9 power creature for 5 mana. Does have the 3 toughness, but as you'll see here, once we get into red, there's a lot of payoffs such as Fling, Thud, and Gravitic Punch, where those spells deal damage based on the power of the sacrifice creature. So obviously Yargle over here is just a beast, with 9 power, and yeah, he's perfect for those kind of spells. So you can come up with some cool shenanigans, maybe even with like a Pegasus Corsair or something like that, where you can swing in with both of them, give Yargle flying, really be really creative with the Yargle builds. I'm sure. I'm glad Yargle's in here. He's just awesome. Moving on into the 6 mana plus, 6 mana and 7 mana creatures for black. I decided to throw in Twisted Abomination as a bomb because it does have the 3 toughness, but it has built-in regeneration, and it could just be a really annoying threat. It does have the 5 power, so you can swing in with it, regenerate it once it trades into something. And earlier in the game, if you can't really cast the spell, you just swamp cycle it for a swamp. You do have to pay the 2 mana and discard it, but now it's in your graveyard, and now you can bring it back from the graveyard onto the battlefield. So really cool card for the black archetype, and also has the built-in regeneration. I think it could be a kind of a bomb, being an annoying threat to try and remove. If you don't remove it, I mean, it's just going to constantly trade in for 5 power or for 5 damage. So, I might be wrong about the bomb part, but in my opinion, I think it's just kind of annoying, at least, with the built-in regeneration. And moving on into Eater of Hope, it's another card that has built-in regeneration, but in order to regenerate it, you have to not only pay the 1 black, but you also have to sacrifice another creature. So just having the regeneration to maintain its ability to stay on board, to sustain a removal, or target destroyer removal is pretty good. But as a 6/4 flyer, it's definitely a bomb. I mean, 6 power on a flyer, on an evasive threat, very, very strong. It is 7 mana, though, so this is more meant for, it's not really for the aggressive decks, it's more for the slower decks that can, board wipe, and then, try and get to the late game. This is their in-game bomb that finishes the game for them. And then on top of that, it's really cool because with the black sacrifice deck, if you have a bunch of sacrifice fodder, for 3 mana, you can sacrifice 2 other creatures and destroy target creatures. So this card can really close out the game and really finish the game for those, maybe for a control deck or for just like for the sacrifice deck. Could be really cool. So I definitely threw it in as a bomb because it has the built-in removal as well as the regeneration. So even though it is 7 mana, it's a good in-game bomb. Alright, so moving on into non-creatures, we're going to be going into a lot of removal spells because that's what black is known for. Tragic Slip over here, you know, normally it deals -1/-1, so it's a ping effect, but if you know, a creature died this turn, you can chain it with Tragic Slip, give it Morbid, and now all of a sudden, you know, a creature gets -13, -13. That's pretty much all creatures in this cube. So, very cool effect that does require some setup, but it's a really good payoff because you essentially destroy the biggest creature on the board. Disfigure, Deadweight, both similar in the sense that they give -2, -2. Deadweight can, you know, it's an enchantment aura, so it can, you know, bring a 5 power creature, for instance, down to 3. So, you know, Disfigure can't really do that, but, you know, Disfigure is instant speed, so that's kind of, you know, they both each have their upsides. Supernatural Stamina, I think could be used aggressively or defensively. You know, in the aggressive deck, you can swing in with all of your creatures. You know, it's a good combat trick. You know, it gets +2/+0, and then once it dies, it comes back onto the battlefield tapped. Whereas, you know, defensively, you know, your opponent has a removal spell, or maybe you, you know, you have a big blocker and then it's about to get removed. You can use it as a combat trick to get it back onto the battlefield to help keep blocking for you, even though it does come back onto the battlefield tapped. But yeah, just the fact that you can maintain board presence and sustain that creature on the board after it's been removed. I think it's a really nice, you know, combat trick for both styles of decks. Duress over here, just a good, maybe most likely going to be from the sideboard if you are playing against, if you're doing best 2 out of 3 draft cube. You know, you can, you know, game 2, game 3 against the control deck, bring in Duress to take out like a board wiper or what have you against the control decks. Not really sure if it's main deckable. Maybe if you do try and make a discard deck, like with Pilfering Imp and Fell Spectre along with Burglar Rat, you know, maybe you want to make that kind of deck. It could be main decked in that sense, but you know, most likely going to be from the sideboard. And moving on into the 2 mana plays, we're going to see more removal spells. Last Gasp, Instant Speed, -3, -3. Pretty solid removal. 2 mana for a 3 toughness trade. Pretty good. Very similar to Lightning Strike in that sense. Diabolic Edict. Target player sacrifices a creature. This is mainly going to be used. Not really effective. I mean, it's good, solid removal, I guess, against like green decks. You know, they're playing big chunky creatures. Hopefully, you can get a big creature, but it does give them the control of what they can sacrifice. So, not really effective against the weenie decks, the mono white weenie or the mono red deck wins deck, where they're playing a bunch of early game drops that, you know, that aren't, you know, this card just isn't as effective because the player can just sacrifice their 1/1 or whatever. But you know, still, if it's removal, you'll take it. Ultimate price over here, it's probably going to hit a vast majority of targets because most cards in this cube, there's not a lot of multicolored creatures, so it's, you know, instant speed, 2 mana, you know, destroy target creatures, pretty good. Monocolored creature. Vicious Offering and Severed Strands. You know, Severed Strands is a must to sacrifice, but Vicious Offering, it's an optional kicker effect where you can sacrifice a creature for a bonus effect. In the case of Vicious Offering, on its base, it's a 2 mana, deal -2, -2 to a target. Or, you know, once it's kicked and you sacrifice a creature, it deals -5, -5. So all of a sudden it can trade up into bigger creatures. Whereas Severed Strands, you know, you're not really going to pay attention to you gain life equal to the sacrifice creature's toughness. I don't think you should really pay attention to that. You really just want to sacrifice your weakest creature. Maybe it's a 1/1 token. The gain life is just a small bonus, but essentially it's, you know, trade off your smallest creature, destroy your target opponent's biggest creature. So that's sorcery speed, but that's good removal. Sign in Blood, you know, double black, but you get to draw 2 cards, so it's pretty good for both the aggressive decks or the defensive decks, just to refill your hand, keep the gas going, keep the threats going, but you do lose 2 life, but otherwise, like, I think it can be used in both senses to refill your hand in the aggressive decks, or, you know, after a board wipe to maintain a card advantage in a control deck. Painful Truths over here, this is a convert spell, so it's a variable based off the amount of colors of mana spent to cast it. So again, this is another one of those draw spells. If you're in a 2-color deck, it's going to draw 2 and you deal 2 life, or you pay 2 life. Whereas in a 3-color deck, maybe like Esper, it's a, you know, draw 3, but you deal 3 damage to yourself. So, you know, it's based off of the colors. Probably not really good in a monocolored deck. Mainly going to be used for those dual and triple colored plus decks. Mephitic Vapors over here. It's you know, removal. It's -1, -1 to all creatures. Probably best from the sideboard against the tokens early game mono white weenie decks, or you know, just if you know your opponent is playing that strategy where this card's very effective, because otherwise, -1/-1 is not a very strong sweeper. But you do get to surveil too, so you get to control your draws for your next. You can pitch both of them into the graveyard if they're both lands, for instance. Mind Rot over here, it's a sorcery speed that, again, with the discard archetype, maybe you are going the Fell Spectre, Burglar Rat, discard payoff. Mind Rot is here for you because your opponent has to discard 2 cards. And Ruinous Path, there's no planeswalkers, but destroy target creature at sorcery speed, and it scales up in the late game because later on for 7 mana, you can essentially turn one of your lands into a 4/4 elemental creature with haste, and it's still a land. It's a land creature. So yeah, very interesting card to get another creature, especially a 4/4. That's a solid body. Moving on into the 4 mana spells, Dark Bargain. Again, it can be used both aggressively, defensively, instant speed. Look at the top 3, put 2 into your hand, 1 into the graveyard, and it deals 2 damage to you. Kind of refill your hand. Rite of Belzenok. This one I think is a low-key bomb, even though it does take a while to get out on the board, because turn 4 you play it, you get 2 0/1 creature tokens, pretty much sacrifice fodder, or they can clog up the board, but after the 5th turn you get another set of those, and then on the 6th turn, assuming you played this on turn 4, you get your big 6/6 Flample, Flying Trample Demon, and it requires a sacrifice at the beginning of your upkeep, and if you run out of cards to sacrifice or creatures to sacrifice, it deals 6 damage to you. But otherwise, it's just a solid 6 mana 6/6, or solid 4 mana 6/6. You do have to wait a few turns, and so that does leave it. Your opponent's going to see it, and they can potentially game 2, game 3, bring in some enchantment removal, something like a Reclamation Sage or a Naturalize, and they can destroy it. But otherwise, if they leave it unanswered, it is a bomb, because a 6/6 Flample Demon is going to just wreck face and just win you the game right then and there after like 2 or 3 hits. So yeah, very strong card. Great for the black archetype deck as well, sacrifice archetype deck as well, because it gives 4 creature tokens. So yeah, but you do have to feed it at every upkeep. Eliminate the competition. Now all these 5 cards are brand new inclusions for the 7th edition of the Starter Cube, which I think is kind of interesting. There was no other 5 mana spells, but these are really cool because. Well, I'll just start off with Eliminate the Competition. This one's a dynamic sacrifice spell, so again, another payoff for the sacrifice archetype. In this case, you spend 5 mana up front, and then you sacrifice 3 tokens, 3 creatures, and you can destroy 3 target creatures. So, very, very strong card in that sacrifice archetype. You could potentially, board wipe your opponent. And yeah, it's just, for that kind of style of a deck, this is a great payoff. Could essentially win you the game. So could potentially be seen as a bomb, this card. That's how effective it could be in the sacrifice archetype. But anyways, moving on into Gruesome Menagerie. This one is a 5 mana, essentially bring back a 1 mana cost, 2 mana cost, and 3 mana cost creature from your graveyard. So back onto the battlefield. So they get their end of the battlefield effects, but it can be used aggressively or defensively. Defensively in the sense that maybe you have some death touchers that you can bring back, clog up the board, stall out the game. But aggressively in the sense that you got board wiped, and maybe you have a great deck that was curving out a lot of 1-drops, a lot of 2-drops, a lot of 3-drops. Now all of a sudden you have another board state after that board wipe. So could potentially be used from the sideboard, maybe main deck it. Depends on what you're feeling, what you drafted, but a great inclusion. Also great for the sacrifice archetype as well, because you're sacrificing cards left and right. Now all of a sudden, boom, 1 mana, you get 3 cards that you can sacrifice again. And what if those cards, for example, a Goblin Instigator in the red-black sacrifice archetype deck, you bring that back, now all of a sudden you get another creature token. So a lot of cool play that you can have for the Gruesome Menagerie and the sacrifice archetype. Glad to see it in here. Rise from the Dead is kind of like Gruesome Menagerie in the sense that it's going to bring back not 3 creatures, but it's going to bring back the biggest creature, and you can choose from a graveyard on so your opponent's graveyard is open to this as well. So you destroy one of your opponent's biggest creatures. It's sitting in their graveyard. Now it's a ripe target for Rise from the Grave. Of course, this is a card that's for 5 mana, it has to be a good payoff. It has to be at least a 5 mana creature plus that you want to be using this on, because it is a 5 mana investment up front at sorcery speed, and it also has to be in the graveyard. So you really it might not be main decked, especially against the smaller creature decks, and maybe you're playing a control deck and you don't have a big creature. Its effectiveness might, it's probably better off from the sideboard when you know that there's big creatures to bring back from the graveyard. So, yeah, but overall it's a great spell. It's kind of slow though for 5 mana, and it requires a creature to be in the graveyard that's worthy to bring back from the dead, because it's only one creature. So you want to make sure you're really effective on what you choose. Okay, so advancing into red, another about 30 creatures. So a decent amount of creatures for red. So we're going to see a bunch of aggressive, red deck wins kind of creatures. For example, Fanatical Firebrand, haste, 1/1, but it can also be used to ping damage to either a creature or a player. Foundry Street Denizen is whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+0. So even if you have like Goblin Instigator, for example, this will pump it up into a +2, into a 3 power 3/1. That's pretty good for a 1-drop. And same with Goblin Banneret, another way just to have another aggressive 1-drop. You can pump it up 2 mana to make it a 3/1. Again, another really solid early game play. Also has the built-in Mentor that can put a +1/+1 counter on another target attacking creature. Torch Courier is another 1/1 haster, but it has a really cool effect where you can sacrifice it and give one of your later game plays haste. So if you have a flyer, for instance, you can give it haste, swinging for more damage. Skirk Prospector is, I guess, kind of a goblin payout. If your goblins get stalled out on the board, they can be used later in the game as a sacrifice outlet. This Skirk Prospector could be used as a sacrifice outlet to kind of ramp up into bigger creatures and bigger plays. Also can sacrifice itself too. Bomat Courier is a 1/1 haster that, if it starts off on the play, turn 1, starts swinging in immediately. Every time it attacks, you exile the top card of your library face down underneath it, and then at any time you can pay 1 red, discard your hand, and sacrifice Bomat Courier, and you get all the exiled cards into your hand. And it's just a really great card for the aggressive, red deck wins kind of strategy. It was really prominent in the previous meta, pre-rotation, before Guilds of Ravnica, in Hazret Red. Also in like the red-black unlicensed disintegration decks. Just a really great early game play. So moving on into the 2-drops, we have quite a variety over here. And we're going to start off with a 2-mana 2/1 with All-Tac Bloodseeker. Now this one, anytime a creature an opponent controls dies, it gets +2/+0 first strike and haste. So if you can play it on the board, shock something, kill one of their creatures, now all of a sudden it's a 4/1 first strike haster. Really aggressive, great card for the aggressive strategy in red. Champion of the Flame. This one is another one of those cards where, the payoff for aura and equipment, along with the Danith the Capuchin, having that, archetype built in. Maybe you build like a Boros or aura and equipment based deck. I think it would be really cool. Champion of the Flame starts off as a 1/1, which is pretty poor, but every time you equip for each aura and equipment, it gets +2/+2, so it can easily grow into a behemoth. Has built-in trample, and I think it's just a really cool build around. Even though auras and auras are very susceptible to 2-for-1s, where you attach it to a creature and it gets removed, it gets killed. Now you're down 2 cards for their 1 card for the 1 removal spell. So the payoff should be great. And in this case, you get this dude who's dual wielding a flaming axe and a flaming sword. I mean, dude, just look at this guy. I mean, he's a beast. He's just this is who I want to play in all the video games. Champion of the Flame. So a really cool build arounds. But moving on into another Goblin, Cheering Fanatic. This is from Battle Bond. Whenever it attacks, first off, it starts off as a bear, a 2/2 stat line, and whenever it attacks, you choose a card name. spells with the chosen name, it costs 1 less to cast this turn. So on your second main phase, you can cast maybe a creature for less, or you can play that lightning strike for 1 mana. So it's a lightning bolt. But really cool, interesting design. It's also a goblin, so just another cool thing that you can keep in mind for the goblin strategy. Electrostatic field along with thermal alchemist. Even though these are defensive cards in the sense that they are defenders and they do have high toughness and they can't attack, I still put them in the aggressive label category because for the red burn, or maybe you are in like blue as well with the Murmuring Mystics, or like Archaeomancer, the one that can bring back an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. You can bring back another burn spell and just kind of have that kind of burn strategy. This is another payoff where it deals additional damage. Thermal Alchemist deals 1 damage every time you tap it, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you can untap it. So just really crank out the damage in that sense. Goblin Crater Maker over here. Really cool card, just a 2/2 bear, but you can also pay 1 and sacrifice itself to shock essentially another creature. Also has a really cool other option. You have modal. It's a modal spell, modal removal built into a creature, so I think it's really good. But you can also destroy target colorless non-land permanents. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. Not only is it like a 2 mana 2/2, but also can be used as removal for the early game, or if your opponent has maybe like a big artifact creature, you can destroy it. So a really cool card. Goblin Instigator, 2 1/1 Goblin creature tokens can be used for the sacrifice fodder deck or for the go wide strategy, where maybe you can pump up your whole team. Turn 1, you play Goblin. Turn 2, Goblin Instigator. Now you have 3 goblins, and you can just really go wide, overwhelm your opponent aggressively in that way. Kiln Fiend, another one of those instant and sorcery payoffs where it starts off as a 2 mana 1/2, which is pretty poor. It's below average. You really want to see at least 2 mana 2/2 as a vanilla stat line, but in this sense, it's another one of those payoffs where you can do insane burst damage, along with Electrostatic Field and Thermal Alchemist, where you're playing your instant and sorcery burn spells. All of a sudden, it's getting pumped up +3 power. So you play 2, you play like a shock, and you play another 1 mana spell. All of a sudden, it gets +6, +0, and it's swinging in for 7. It's a 7/2. So another one of those payoffs for the burn deck. Ordinary Goblin, another goblin, comes down as a 2 mana 2/1. But anytime it gets blocked or it blocks itself, it has a triggered ability where it deals 1 damage to that creature, so it can trade off really well into tokens, 1 toughness tokens, or trade up into a 3 toughness creature. It attacks, gets blocked by a 3 toughness creature. They trade. Torch Fiend, 2 mana 2/1 with a built-in removal. You pay 1 and sacrifice itself to destroy target artifact. Just good to have that flexibility built into a creature. And yeah, we already went over Thermal Alchemist, so let's move on into the 3-mana plays. So we have Goblin War Chief, another one of those payoffs for the goblins. All of your goblins have haste. 3 mana 2/2 without flying is like but hopefully the payoff of giving your goblins haste is well worth it. Pia Nalar, this is a really cool card. 3 mana 2/2, but also spawns a 1/1 Thopter flying token. So that flying Thopter is an artifact creature. You can pump it up with Pia Nalar at a rate of 2 mana for 1 power, but on an evasive threat later in the game when you have like 6 mana, 8 mana, could matter. And also you have that additional flexibility where you don't necessarily have to sacrifice the Thopter. You can sacrifice an artifact. You do have to pay 1 additional mana, but you can choose a target creature that can't be blocked. So that's just nice additional flexibility all in one card. Pia Nalar is really cool. So glad to see it as a new card for version 7. Gutter Snipe along with Smelt Ward Minotaur, another one of those cards that promotes the instant and sorcery kind of archetype. Burn archetype is its kind of style. Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent every time you cast an instant or sorcery, so you can really go off on this card. If you really build around it, along with Smelt Ward Minotaur, where target creature and opponent controls can't block this turn, so you can really push in for damage with your with your board. Rummaging Goblin is a goblin, 3 mana for a 1/1, so it's really poor stat line for 3 mana. But you do get a really useful ability, in my opinion, in draft where you can well, at least unlimited, you can tap it and discard a card and then draw a card. So this is really helpful pitching those really poor draws later in the game. You draw land, you're getting land flooded, discard all of those, just keep on drawing into more gas. I think it's really helpful for both the aggressive and the defensive strategies, kind of filter out your draws. Helpful in both of those decks. Voltuk over here, Keeper of the Flame, legendary 3 mana 3/2, so 3 power for 3 drop is typically where you at least want to be. But this one is another one of those payoffs for auras and equipments. So again, with Danitha and paired up with Champion of the Flame, you can choose like a Boros, aura, and equipment deck. Really cool to have this in that kind of archetype because the payoff is at the beginning of your combat on your turn. For each equipment and aura, you create a 3/1 token elemental creature with trample and haste, and in that sense you always want to be swinging in with those because they also come with the downside of exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step, so it gives great incentive to just swing in with those elemental creatures. They have built-in trample and haste, so they're at least going to push in some damage. So again, if you have 2 auras or equipment attached to Volduck, that's 2 3/1s, and if you go really crazy with the equipment, you have 3-4 equipment attached all onto Voltuk. He can really just start spawning armies for you, and kind of an interesting build around. So glad to see this card still in this cube. Just have that as another payoff for that kind of archetype. Enthralling Victor. This is another card. 4 mana for a 3/2 is kind of poor, but the built-in effect is an act of treason on target power 2 or less. This is really helpful for the red-black sacrifice archetype. You can take one of your opponent's creatures, swing in, or you can just hold it back and use it as a sacrifice fodder. You have a sacrifice outlet, you can sacrifice that card. Or in the mono red kind of style of deck, you can just push in additional damage, take out one of their 2-power creatures, just push in some additional damage. So really nice to have that built into a card. Heart Piercer Mana Core, I put it as a bomb because along with Yargle, for instance, 4 mana for 4/3, I think vanilla-wise, you want to go at least 4 mana 4/4. You want to get that 4th, point of toughness. But for 4 mana 4/3, you at least get the 4 power. But the additional effect on this card is really what makes it into a bomb, where you can sacrifice a creature, and it deals damage equal to that creature's power to target creature or player. So it could be a removal, or it could be an insane burn bomb, where you have a Yargle, a 9/3, and all of a sudden, boom, you're hitting them with 9 power, right? And then on top of that, it has an embalm built into it, so it has the extra graveyard value where you can exile this card from your graveyard. You have to spend 6, and you create a token that's a copy of it. Now it does the token is it has no mana cost, so it could be taken by something like a Thralling Victor, but and also has only sorcery speed, so it's not instant speed. But just the fact that you have that additional value built into a card, where you can use its effect, the inner battlefield effect, to deal more damage. I'd consider it a bomb, at least in this cube. That's just me, though. It's probably right there on the border of being a bomb or not a bomb. But it could potentially be used as removal for the black-red sacrifice deck. Volley Veteran is 4 mana 4/2 is pretty poor because 4 mana for a 2 toughness creature is kind of poor, even though it does have 4 power. But the payoff on this card is that for the Goblin synergy, the Goblin archetype, where you can turn 1 Goblin, turn 2 get 2 more Goblins, and then turn 3 maybe you have, I don't know, 6 Goblins. That'd be insane. And then turn 4 Volley Veteran, you can essentially annihilate your opposing player's biggest creature. Just another one of those payoffs. Most likely it's going to do 2 or 3 damage, but even then, when it enters the battlefield, you could destroy a creature. That's really good. Has that built-in 2-for-1 potential. Moving on into 5 mana. Charging Monster Star, I put him as a bomb because you do get that 5 mana 5/5, but also has that haste and trample for that surprise effect. In the aggressive strategy, maybe you're just need that one finishing card, and I think Charging Monster Star can be that. On top of that, it has just a nice solid 5/5 body. Has the built-in trample with that. So I'd consider it evasive because you're most likely going to get some damage in with this card. It's definitely a great aggressive curve topper. I think, even though could be debated that an aggressive deck doesn't really want to reach 5 mana, but I don't know. I mean, it's just there's a lot of 5 power haste. I don't know. I think it's a good one of maybe. I mean, well, they're all one ofs, but just a good have 1 5 mana play just to really seal off the game. Maybe as like a good top deck. I don't know. Other draft players who play more of the aggressive decks will probably say 5 mana is too much, so could be debated if this is a bomb or not, but I just threw it in as a bomb category. Moving on into Goblin Dark Dwellers, this one you get a 5 mana 4/4 with Menace, so not it's not like flying, and it is a little bit more of a poorer stat line with 4 power and 4 toughness, but once it enters the battlefield, you get a great effect where you can cast a target instant or sorcery from your graveyard with converted mana cost 3 or less. So you can recast that Lightning Strike, or maybe you're in black-red, you can recast like a removal spell. If you do recast it for free without paying its mana cost, you do have to exile it. So, but just having that fact that built-in value, the fact that you can get another removal spell with this card, I think could definitely push it up into the bomb category. Really change the board state, especially if you're in black. Destroy one creature, and then you play this card, and then you can recast that spell to destroy another creature. Could be really swingy with that kind of effect. So. Or just in burn in general. But moving on into Magma, this one is another 5 mana 4/4. Doesn't have any kind of evasion, but it does have potential to be a bomb in that black-red sacrifice deck, where you do have to pay 1 mana, but you sacrifice a non-land permanent and it can deal 1 damage to any target. So you can ping off your opposing creatures, or you can ping off towards the late game. You just need that last 4 or 5 damage. Sacrifice all of your creatures that you don't really need anymore, and just deal damage to their face. So could be a potential closeout in that kind of strategy, the sacrifice archetype. And last but not least, moving on into the 6-drops, Chartooth Cougar, 6 mana for 4 toughness, 4/4 for 6 mana. That's not where you really want to be, especially since it doesn't have trample or evasion. But the fact that you can mountain cycle it for a mountain, pay 2 mana, discard this early in the game to get a mountain to really establish your mana base early in the game. Later on as a top deck, it comes down and could potentially be pumped up. I wouldn't consider it a bomb necessarily, but I think it can be used both for aggressive decks or the defensive decks. Defensively, as a finisher, but in both cases, early in the game, it can establish your mana base. Might not necessarily be an aggressive deck choice, because you'd probably much rather have an aggressive 2-drop, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's really debatable, but. Yeah, I'm not really sure if it's a bomb because it doesn't have built-in evasion or trample or anything like that, and it does come as a 4 toughness for 6 mana. So, moving on into Burning Sun's Avatar. This one I definitely think is a bomb because it's 6 mana for 6/6, really solid stat line. Doesn't have trample or anything like that, but has a great enter the battlefield effect where it can effectively be removal along with that 6/6 body, where you can destroy one of your opponent's 3 toughness creatures, and then on top of that you essentially lightning bolt them in the face. Just why not? So this is a great card just to get that 6 mana 6/6, and also you get that potential 2-for-1. You can destroy one of your opponent's 3 toughness creatures. So. Or you can combo it off with another removal spell and try and finish off an opposing creature, And just a really great card. Just a lot of damage in this card, along with that 6/6 body. So, going on into non-creatures, we're going to see some burn spells. Lava Spike is a new inclusion, definitely for the aggressive burn deck. It can only target players. There's no planeswalkers at sorcery speed. Sheevan Fire over here is pretty much a removal spell. It can't be used to burn your opponent's face because it can only target creatures, but later on in the game it can scale up, and you pay an additional 4, kick it for 5 mana, and you can destroy 4 toughness creatures at instant speed. Pretty good. Shock, good solid early game removal or burn. Deal 2 damage to any target. Thud, again, another one of those payoffs for playing Yargle, or if you can really get your creatures to be really high power somehow, maybe you pump them up or whatever, you can thud them. We'll see later on Fling and Gravitic Punch, but in this case, Thud, it's sorcery speed. You have to sacrifice a creature, and it deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. So it could be used as a removal or just as last, in-game burn that you need to finish off an opponent. Same with Fling. Fling is 1 mana extra, but it's instant speed. So just having that instant speed flexibility could help. But it could be used as a removal or, just as that last burn. Lightning Strike, again, another removal / aggro burn spell. Deal 3 damage to any target. Run amok over here, 2 mana for a 3/3 combat trick pump up, and you also give that creature trample, so another way to push into that damage. Dragon Fodder could be used for that red-black sacrifice, sacrifice fodder, or it could be used for the go wide strategy of really establishing your board, go wide, and then pump them up with like a trumpet blast or whatever. But again, it could be used in that sacrifice fodder deck as well. Avacyn's Judgment over here is a sorcery speed, deal 2 damage divided as you choose among target creatures or players. Could potentially be burn, could potentially be removal, can ping out 2/1 toughness tokens, or if maybe your opponent has Burglar Rat and you can discard this card, and you can pay its mana cost or its madness cost. You can deal X variable damage, however much mana you have at the time, divided as you choose among target creatures or players instead. So potential to deal some scalable damage later in the game, but I don't think there's too many discard outlets in this cube. So yeah, I'm not sure how often you're going to use Madness in this cube, but otherwise it's just 2 mana, deal 2 damage as you see fit amongst the board state, or just as burn. So good solid removal in my opinion, even if it's just 2 damage for 2 toughness creature. I think it's just simple solid removal for 2 mana. Mizium Mortar is way better, dealing at sorcery speed, 2 mana for 4 damage. And the really cool thing about this card is that later on in the game, it can potentially be a one-sided board wipe by casting its overload cost for 6 mana, and you replace, instead of target creature, you just say each creature you don't control. So deal 4 damage to each creature you don't control. It's a one-sided board wipe for 6 mana. That's really, really strong. Yeah, just see this being a really solid high-pick removal spell for both the control deck and the aggro decks. The Flame of Keld. This one's definitely an aggro payoff. You empty out your hand, so you're not as affected by the first chapter of discard your hand. And then on your next turn, you draw a card, and then you draw 2 more cards from the second chapter of Flame of Keld. So 1 from your draw step, 2 from the second chapter, and then you wait 1 more additional turn, and then on the 3rd chapter, you could deal some insane burst damage, especially if you have a bunch of burn spells. Tealinali's Crown over here is another one of those enchantment aura payoffs. Could be used as a 2 mana, deal 1 damage to ping one of your opponent's creatures, but most likely you're going to want to stick this on one of your own because the payoff is really good. You get 3 power and then trample for 2 mana as an aura. Now again, auras are very susceptible to 2-for-1s, but at the same time, if you're in that Boros aura equipment archetype, Tealinali's Crown can really be a great solid pushing that early game damage as well as having that aura payoff. So moving on into 3 drops. Bombard, solid removal, 3 mana, deal 4 damage, target creature at instant speed. Hungry Flames, in a similar sense, instant speed, but it only deals 3 damage, but has the bonus upside of dealing 2 to the target player. So overall 5 damage in total for 3 mana, so could be used as an aggressive card as well to just get pushing that burn damage. Destructive Tampering, destroy target artifact, or you can choose that your creatures without flying can't block this turn, so good to just push in that extra damage, but really nice to have modal spells just for that flexibility. Could come in from the sideboard or could be main decked just for that, your opponents can't block with, if they don't have flying, you can push in that damage and that red deck wins kind of strategy. Direct Current over here, it's 3 mana for deal 2 damage is really slow. The equivalent is shock for for 1 mana for deal 2 damage to any target. But the cool thing about direct current is that you get that extra value with the jumpstart, so you can pitch a land that you don't need later in the game, and now it's to any target. So you can push damage to face. If you have Gutter Snipes, Electrostatic Field, Murmuring Mystic, for instance, you can get double triggers by casting this twice. But it is a little bit slower, but in those kind of decks, it could be a really good payoff with the jumpstart. Hordling Outburst, another one of those payoffs for red-black sacrifice, where you can get some fodder to sacrifice. 3 mana, 3 tokens right then and there is really nice. But at the same time, you can also it can also be used in that go wide strategy where you can pump them up, for instance, with the Trumpet Blast down here. Attacking creatures get +2/+0. Turn 1 goblin, turn 2 you get 2 goblins, so you're at 3 goblins now, and then turn 3 you're all of a sudden with Hordling Outburst, you're at 6 goblins, and then you swing in for lethal with the Trumpet Blast on turn 4. I mean, it could be an insane start on the play. Mark Immunity over here is kind of like an active treason. Sorcery speed, gain control of target creature until end of turn. You take your opponent's biggest creature, maybe it's a flyer, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is interesting, and you untap it so you can swing in with it, deal damage with that flyer, and it gains haste until end of turn and everything. So you really putting that +1/+1 counter is kind of a downside if you give it back to them, because now it's stronger. But at the same time, in the black-red sacrifice, imagine that scenario where you take their biggest creature, it's a flyer, you put a +1/+1 counter, you swing in for some additional damage, and then all of a sudden you have a sacrifice outlet, you kill their creature, you sacrifice their creature. That's just a wombo combo. I mean, it's just insane. You deal a bunch of damage, sacrifice it for some sacrifice payoff. Really cool in the red-black sacrifice deck. Radiant Flames over here, it's another one of those converge spells where it's scalable based off of up to 3 based off of how many colors of mana spent to cast it. So if you're in like a Jeskai deck, red, white, and blue, that's deal 3 damage to each creature. Pretty solid. Otherwise, in a 2-color deck, it's going to deal 2 damage to each creature. And of course, with the converge, since it's probably not really useful in a monocolored deck. Trumpet Blast over here, again, we've discussed about go wide and attack, swing in with everything. Gravitic Punch, another one of those Yargle, Gravitic, Fling/Thud effects, where this one you can't choose creatures, you can only choose the target player. So it's kind of limited in that sense. It doesn't affect the board state, but at the same time, if you do have Yargle, imagine Gravitic Punch, and then you could jumpstart it later in the game. That's 18 damage right there without even swinging in. So having that built-in jumpstart, even at 4 mana, having that ability to cast it twice, or again, if you have like something like Gutter Snipe or Murmuring Mystic, where you have those payoffs of instant and sorceries, having that built-in jumpstart, get the additional value, get those additional triggers. Radiating Lightning, this one's a 4 mana, deal 3 damage to target player, and a 1 damage to each creature that player controls. This one might be best from the sideboard, because 4 mana, deal 3 damage to target player. I mean, it only deals 1 damage to the board state to your opponent's creatures, so kind of a heavy investment. It is instant speed though, but decided to put it as removal against the tokens, and potentially an aggressive inclusion if you have Gutter Snipes and maybe like Electrostatic Field. You can clear out the opposing tokens and deal a bunch of damage that way, straight to the dome. So yeah, kind of an iffy card at 4 mana, but in the right deck, right setup, it might be well worth it. Devil's Playground over here is the last highest costed spell, non-creature spell for red, and it's kind of goes in with that black-red sacrifice theme. In this case, it's 6 mana, and you get 4 tokens, 1/1 tokens, and each of those tokens get once they die, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So it can affect the board state. It can be the last burn. It can even be used to trade up. So if your opponent has like an 8/8, for instance, you have these 4 1/1 demon or devil creature tokens that they all block that 8/8, and it deals 4 damage in combat, and then all of a sudden all those guys trigger after they die, and you can redirect all that damage back onto that 8/8 creature and then destroy that 8/8. So kind of interesting in that sense. Or you could just use it as sacrifice fodder to pump up your black synergy with the sacrifice archetype. So really cool inclusion from the previous 6th version. I'm glad they kept it in here, even though it is 6 mana. I think it's really nice for that archetype. Alright, so getting into our last monocolor in green, 31 creatures. We're going to see a lot of ramping, so things like Arbor Elf, Llanowar Elves, Avacyn's Pilgrim, one mana dorks. Over here, I guess it's debatable if this is an actual bomb or not. I just wanted to label her bad, so she can be like a bad granny. Inovia Peshiri, Sage Lifecrafter. I think it can be used both aggressively and defensively. An aggressive go wide strategy, you can create tokens, and later on, the payoff for having a bunch of creatures is that you can create an XX colorless construct based off of X being the number of creatures you control. So the fact that she can just crank them out, I think it's kind of interesting for both the aggressive deck and the defensive deck in the sense that you can also have a bunch of chump blockers, or just keep on going wide with the chump blockers, and then maybe later on in the game you create a big construct for the defensive decks. I really don't know, but in my opinion, even though it is kind of slow, I do kind of see Ovia being a bomb, just being able to generate so much value. I might be wrong though. Some people might have played with her in the Kaladesh Limited, so they might have better opinions on that. But in my eyes, I think she could be a bomb. And also, I just wanted to label her Bad Granny. But yeah, moving on into the 2-drops. More ramp spells and more ramp creatures and Deathcap Cultivator, Druid of the Cow, Elfham Druid, Naga Vitalist, and Wall of Roots, as well as a Voyaging Satyr. So as you can see, Green's identity is well established in the early game, being a bunch of ramp, and we'll see the payoffs for that ramp being big green creatures here in a second. But Deathcap Cultivator, also has the benefit of having Delirium, becoming a Death Toucher after 4 or more card types are are in your graveyard. Elfham Druid can benefit, kicking out, spells such as Untamed Kavu down here, which initially is a 2/2. Just a regular bear with Vigilance and Trample, but then on top of that, later in the game, it becomes a 5/5. Being kicked, it comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Crawl Harpooner, with the Undergrowth strategy, can take out, it can fight creatures with flying. It scales up based off the number of creatures in your graveyard, so could be used as removal. Also, just aggressive, 2 mana 3/2 is really good as a vanilla test, so could be used in the aggressive decks. Elfish Visionary, comes down as a 2 mana, filters itself out. Just as a 1/1, pretty poor for a 2 mana play, but I didn't really know where to put this, so I put it in the aggressive deck. But could be used as in the defensive decks as well, just as a chump blocker. Draw another cards in similar sense to Dust Legion Zealot in black. So could be used in the defensive decks as well, or the sacrifice fodder. Maybe you have a Golgari sacrifice. That'd be kind of interesting. Wall of Roots, 0/5 Defender, but it can also be used to ramp out by putting -1 toughness counters on Wall of Roots. Each time you do that, it adds a green, but you can only activate it once each turn. It slowly diminishes its toughness. So, but the fact that you can essentially use this as ramp, for 5 turns essentially before it kills itself. Getting that additional ramp, again, that's what green is known for. Voyaging Satyr, untap target land, similar to Arbor Elf. Now going into the 3-drops, we're going to see Atsokan Archer, 1/4 for 3 mana. So more of a defensive stat line with reach, so it can clog up the board against 2/2 flyers. But once it enters the battlefield, it can essentially ping off a 1 toughness token or a creature, maybe against the red deck or the white weenie deck, and it fights. They fight each other. So with the 4 toughness, effectively it can be removal, ping removal. District Guide over here, 3 mana 2/2 could be used in both cases for the aggressive deck or the defensive deck, in my opinion. It's a little bit slower in the aggressive deck, but the fact that you can establish your land, I think it's just a really nice effect for both decks. And also a really great card in the 3-color decks. Daggerback Basilisk is a 2/2 Death Toucher. Just I think this card is, at least for the past few metas, We've had it in Guilds of Ravnica, we've had it in Ravnica Allegiance, M19, so it's pretty common to see this 3 mana 2/2 with Death Touch. It's kind of evasive, people don't really want to trade into it, but with that 2/2 stat line, I didn't want to consider it an actual evasive creature, but could be used effectively in both the aggressive decks or the defensive decks. With the Death Touch, could trade into stuff. Gear per Guide is a 3 mana 3/2, so a little more aggressive with the 3 power, and also has that built-in activated ability. Spend 3 mana. Target creature you control can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Has that Steel Leaf Champion effect where it can't be blocked by chump blockers. Jungle Born Pioneer. Another one of those go wide payoffs, but in this case, it actually has if you wanted to go like aura or enchantment auras slash equipment, you get a 1/1 hexproof blue merfolk token. So having that built-in hexproof, kind of like that Bogle's effect, the 1 mana 1/1 hexproof could be useful. So I decided to put it in the aggressive strategy. 3 mana 2/2 also gives a 1/1, so effectively 3/3 in stats. Reclamation Sage over here, target enchantment or artifact removal. You also get that 2/1 body, but could most likely be seen from the sideboard, from your pool of extra cards against maybe like a giant artifact creature or a problematic enchantment. Yavimaya Sapherd, again another one of those 3 mana 2/2 go wide strategy tokens cards, but could also be used in the sacrifice, because you get 2 bodies. Moving on into the 4-drops, Ambassador Oak, 4 mana for 2 bodies in a 3/3 and a 1/1. So, could be used aggressively or defensively. Go wide strategy for their aggro deck, or defensively having multiple bodies of chump block. You have that 1 chump blocker as well as a 3/3 to trade into like an aggressive 2/2 or something. I don't know. Decided to throw it in for both the aggressive and the defensive decks. Deadbridge Goliath over here I think is a bomb, being a 4 mana 5/5. Also you get the extra value of Scavenge, where you spend 6, exile this card from your graveyard, and put 5 +1/+1 counters. Based on this equal to the card's power on target creature. Yeah, so this card's power. So it's 5 +1/+1 counters, just additional value later in the game. You can only scavenge as a sorcery, but the fact that the first half, when you play this card, is a 4 mana 5/5, is a great aggressive stat line. Only 2 green, so could be an effective curve topper for the aggressive decks. Maybe you make like a Groll aggressive deck. 4 mana 5/5, and Ravnica Allegiance was the Sunder Shaman, and he is 2 red and 2 green. So again, a very great rate of 4 mana for a 5/5 body. Doesn't have trample or anything, but the fact that it's going to start clearing the way. If your opponent has chump blockers in the way, they're going to try and stall, because 5 damage is a lot. And then on top of that, what I really think what really makes this card a bomb in my opinion is that extra graveyard value. The fact that you can pump up essentially any one of your creatures for 5 counters is pretty good. Essentially, it comes back to life in that sense, right? So, decided to put this in the bomb category in green. Giant Spider, 4 mana for 2/4 reach. It's just it's good solid anti-air, but it's more of the defensive stat line with the 4 toughness. Wolfbriar Elemental. This one is a bomb for the ramp deck in my opinion, because it comes down as a 4 mana 4/4, but then you could kick it for 1 green each additional time. And if you have really big mana, 6, 7, 8 mana, let's say for 8 mana later in the game as a top deck, you play it down as 4 mana and then you kick it 4 times, you get 4 2/2 creatures, so you get an automatic board presence right then and there. So what's that? 8 mana for, let's see here, 4, 8, 8, 12 in stats, if I'm reading that correctly. 4, yeah, 8, wow. So in a big mana deck, if you're trying to ramp out with a bunch of mana dorks, as well as like a circuitous route, which is in here, establish your mana base, go really big. Could be a payout for having that multi-kicker. So let's move on into Acidic Slime, going into the 5 mana drops. 5 mana for a 2/2 body is pretty poor. It does come with Death Touch, so if we think of that as a 3 mana 2/2, well, what do we get for that extra 2 mana? Well, you're gonna get enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. So I think this is main deckable. Just to destroy. There's some decent amount of enchantment and artifacts in this cube, so I think it is main deckable in that sense. But also you get that 2/2 body as a Death Toucher, and you can also destroy a land if there's nothing else to destroy. So put your opponent back down 1 land. Could be helpful, especially if you're on the play and this is your curve topper, you're hitting all your land drops, and they missed a land drop, they go from 3 to 2 or something. Could be really frustrating to play against. So Acidic Slime, labeled him as an R for removal against the target artifact and enchantments, but just coming down as that 3 mana 2/2 is that plus upside, the extra 2 mana for that effect. Decide to label him as a removal. Crescent Herd Caller over here, 5 mana. You get 2 bodies, 2 3/3s with trample. So, the 3/3, it's not like a bomb or anything. It's not like a really big body, but the fact that you get 2 of them could help out in the, maybe in the sacrifice deck. But really, I think it's good for both the aggressive go wide strategy as well as the defensive deck. You stall out the board. You get 2 bodies to chump block for you to help stall out the game. To help stabilize you against the aggressive decks, or conversely, on the aggressive side, if you're going wide, maybe you want to pump up your whole team. This could be a good curve chopper since they do get trample. So if you pump them up, you have an anthem effect of like Pride of the Conquerors, for instance. Your whole team gets +2 power. Now all of a sudden, your 3/3s are coming in with 5 power. So just another one of those effects where it creates a token. But at the same time, these are 3/3s, so some upside for both the aggressive and the defensive decks. Rid Scale Tusker over here, I think, is a bomb. It passes the vanilla test, 5 mana for a 5/5, so a good solid body. It's in the upper tier of the bigger creatures. And then on top of that, for the aggressive decks, if you go wide, you put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. And I decided to put it as well for the defensive kind of style of the deck, because say maybe you have some defenders, all of a sudden you increase their toughness, or maybe you have some life linkers, you increase their power to give you more life. So I know it's kind of a stretch, but on top of that, just being a 5 mana 5/5 just as a good solid blocker for the defensive decks, I think it's a bomb either way. So moving on into the 6 drops, Affectionate Indrik, even though it is 6 mana for 4/4, that's not what you really want to see on a stat line for a 6 drop, but it does come in with a built-in fight effect. So essentially you can kill a 3 toughness, like a 3/3, and Affectionate Indrik comes in, gobbles it up, and yeah, just really nice to have that built-in 2-for-1. Elfish Aberration is a 6 mana for 4/5. A little bit better than the Affectionate Indrik. In this case, once it comes out on the field, you'd have to wait an additional turn, but you could potentially ramp up even further, because it ramps up. You can tap it for 3 green. So next turn, playing 6 to cast this, you're at 6 lands. Now all of a sudden you have a mana base of 9 with this card. You have the 6 lands, and then you can tap this for an additional 3. So if you're really going big mana, or earlier in the game, you can forest cycle it. Pay 2 mana, discard this card, search your library for a forest, establish your mana base. So I think it's very flexible for both the decks. It's not really an aggressive card. Maybe I mislabeled it because I don't know. I just decided to put it as an aggressive card because maybe it's helpful to have that cycling, but that might be a stretch. But yeah, that's just maybe a little bit of a mislabel right there. Maybe it's more of a defensive card, but yeah, I decided to label them as both. Moving on into some bigger bombs, an actual bomb and Palaka Worm, because it's a 7 mana 7/7, has built-in trample, so I decided to put it as an evasive threat. You're going to push in some damage with this card for sure. And it's a bomb because once it enters the battlefield, you gain 7 life. So it's also, in my opinion, more of a defensive card as well, because it helps stabilize you. Could be a great curve topper in a control deck. And then once it dies, you get that additional value where it replaces itself. So if you can find some way to recur this card, bring it back from the graveyard onto the battlefield, get even more value, It's just a really big bomb, great top end, block worm, gain 7 life, just it's really going to stabilize the board as well as be a big threat. So, and the last but not least, 8 mana play. It doesn't have trample, but it comes down as a 7/7. But the reason why it's a bomb is because at the beginning of each upkeep, including yours as well as your opponent's, you create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. So as the game goes on, each turn, you're going to get a 1/1 that you can use either as a chum blocker or as another way to establish a go wide presence and swing in for that lethal damage eventually, or even maybe in a sacrifice deck, maybe you create some kind of crazy Jund sacrifice with the red, black, and green, and Verdant forces your top in, and it just creates infinite tokens. That might be a stretch, but this is a good, I guess, top end for like a slow control deck, because it does add inevitability where you're gonna get infinite tokens if your opponent doesn't deal with it. So it is 8 mana. It's gonna come down later in the game. You're probably not gonna land this on curve, so it's probably coming down turn 10, turn 11, turn 12, because you might miss a few land drops. You might stumble, but at the same time, if you do get on the battlefield, it's just infinite value with the tokens on each upkeep that you can use either go wide or as more chump blockers for a defensive strategy. So now going on into non-creatures. In green, we're going to see Giant Growth for opening us off into 1 mana spells. This is both an aggressive and a defensive card in my opinion, because you can save a creature or just be aggressive, give it +3/+3. Prey Upon, that's a fight spell, so it's sorcery speed. Target creature you control fights another creature you don't control. They both deal power equal to each other. Each deals damage equal to its power to each other. So yeah, sometimes it's tough to find removal in green, so it's always good to have like a 1 mana removal like this, because green is known for having bigger creatures. So your bigger creatures can fight into your opponent's smaller creatures. So it's always good to have these fight spells in green. Gather Courage. This one is a 1 mana 2/2, but you can convoke it, so it could potentially be a free card. You have one creature that is untapped, and all of a sudden it's kind of a free card in the sense that you don't have to pay for it, because you can just tap that one creature to cast its 1 green requirement, and all of a sudden, boom, it's free cards are always nice when you don't have to pay for them. Naturalize. This is a removal spell at instant speed, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Always good to have these cards to help balance out the meta of the cube in case there's any problematic artifacts or enchantments. So like that Boros artifact, equipment auras. Potentially you can destroy an enchantment aura, or against big artifact creatures. Always good to have these cards in there. Epic Confrontation. This is another one of those sorcery speed. It fights target creature you don't control. You give it a +1/+2 buff, so it helps give it a favorable fight trade. So always good to have these spells in green. Same with Rabid Bite, but Rabid Bite is not a fight spell. It's a little bit different in the sense that they don't fight, but the target creature you control deals damage equal to its power. So it's like a one-sided fight where the opposing creature doesn't deal its power to your creature. Only your creature deals its power to target creature you don't control. And this also works really well with Death Touchers. So that 3 mana, that 2/2 Death Toucher, you give it Rabid Bite, you can essentially attack or destroy one of your opponent's biggest creatures with Rabid Bite, and you still have that 3 mana 2/2 left on the board because it wasn't a fight spell, it was just a bite. But yeah, hopefully that all made sense. Farseek, Rampant Growth, both of these are a little bit slower ramp spells. They don't put a creature on the board, so I didn't put them as an aggressive spell. It's more of a slower, you have to wait, spend 2 mana to invest into your mana base, search your library for a land card essentially, and put on the battlefield tapped. Establishes your mana base, thins out your deck a little bit, but this is mainly for the big big mana spells, ramp out into bigger creatures, or like you have a multi-kicker card, or maybe if you open a Banefire and you want to throw in a Banefire in here, this cube doesn't come with the Banefire, but you know those X variable spells, these big mana effects, these ramp spells could always be helpful in those kind of archetypes if you want to include that in your own version. But moving on into Ronus' Last Stand, 2 green for sorcery speed. You create a 5 mana 4/4. You know, it could also be helpful even though your lands don't untap during your next untap step. You can potentially in green have a bunch of mana dorks, so those will untap and your lands will stay tapped, but you can still play some stuff maybe if you have a bunch of mana dorks. Fist of Ironwood, this one is, you know, another enchantment aura, but this one's cool because it creates 2 1/1 Saproling creature tokens, so you can go wide, but also gives the enchanted creature trample, so kind of an interesting effect. You establish a board presence as well as give a creature, for example, in the maybe you go green red auras, for instance. You can go wide, establish your board, as well as get the payoffs for the aura effects with Volduck and Champion of the Flame, for instance. Give them trample. Well, actually, I think the Champion of the Flame already has trample. I'm not sure about Volduck. Maybe he has trample. I'll have to go back. But anyways, still establishes a board presence once it enters the battlefield. Pretty nice. Moving on into more ramping, sorcery speed, Kodama's Reach, a new inclusion here. You search your library for 2 basic lands, reveal those, put them onto the battlefield tapped. Another way to establish you know, your mana base. Grow from the Ashes. This one can, you know, it comes onto the battlefield untapped, so you could use it if you want to, you know, maybe you spend 3 mana, bring that land in, or if you kick it for 2 more, for 5 mana, you bring 2 lands in. So, you know, just some more ramp spells. Mouth and Feed is a sorcery speed token creator for 3 mana. You create a 3/3, and then later on you can aftermath it from your graveyard. Cast it from your graveyard for 4 mana for Feed, and it essentially says draw a card for each creature you control power 3 or greater. On the first half of Mouth, you're going to get at least 1. So, you know, being in green, you're going to have a lot of higher power creatures, hopefully. So hopefully you'll be able to draw maybe like 2, 3, 4 cards. That'd be really nice. Decided to put them in both aggro and defensive because I think both decks could use a 3 mana 3/3 as well as, you know, potential to draw a lot of cards. So decided to include them in both. Sprouting Renewal, sorcery speed, convoke, you know, 3 mana for destroy target artifact or enchantment, or it can become a 3 mana 2/2 night vigilance creature token. You know, so 3 mana for either of these is pretty poor. 3 mana for a 2/2 is pretty poor. And we've just seen Naturalize, which is destroy target artifact or enchantment at instant speed. So Sprouting Renewal, the benefit of this is that you can convoke it, so you can potentially in a board stall, if your 1/1 creature tokens aren't doing much, you can convoke them, kind of ramp it out, you know, get some discounted cost on it. Cartouche of Strength, and also the fact that it's modal is really nice too. Cartouche of Strength, 3 mana for another enchantment aura. This one's cool because it kind of has built-in removal built into the enchantment aura, which is pretty nice. It has a built-in fight spell. So once this cartouche enters the battlefield, you may have enchanted creature fight target creature an opponent controls. And on top of that, the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has trample. So just getting that extra +1/+1 and then having it fight could be used as removal. Could also be used in the aggressive, maybe red-green auras if you go that route with Volduck and Champion of the Flame. You get the aura payoff as well as the built-in fight removal spell, so really cool card to see at 3 mana. Just an additional aura payoff. But moving on into 4 mana, Wild Onslaught is a 4 mana instant speed that has the potential to be kicked for an additional 4 mana. On its first half, if you only cast it for 4, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And you know, the fact that you can use it at instant speed, potentially, you know, your opponent has a bad attack, you can, you know, use this, put +1/+1 counters on each of your creatures. Good for the go wide strategy, good for the defensive strategy if you can get some favorable trades in that sense, or you know, if you can kick it later on, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control instead. So that's a big mana spell, 8 mana total, to put +2 essentially, +2 counters on essentially all of your creatures at instant speed. Could really be game changing, really change the board state, especially if your opponent attacks in, and you can take advantage of that and get some favorable trades. Circuitous Route, another just ramp spell. Search your library for up to 2 basic land or gate cards. So this this cube comes with all the gate cards. So if you really want to play 3-color, 4-color stuff, you can fix your mana even further with Circuitous Route by getting 2 dual-colored gate cards. Put them on the battlefield tapped. Now again, gate cards come in the battlefield tapped already, so just the fact that you can fix your mana really well, or even ramp out from 4 mana to 6 is really nice for those kind of style of decks. Hunt the Weak, sorcery speed, +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and then that creature fights target creature you don't control, so just another fight spell at sorcery speed, but the fact that it gives a +1/+1 on that creature, hopefully you'll be able to get a much favorable trade. Your 3/3 all of a sudden becomes a 4/4, it can eat up another 3/3 in that fight, so pretty nice to see more removal in green. Moving on into the 5 mana non-creature spells. Faded Intervention is just 5 mana for 2 3/3 green centaur creatures, and if you cast it, it kind of has an addendum effect from Ravnica Allegiance, where if it's your turn, it's an instant speed, but if you cast on your turn, scry, you can scry 2, so kind of fix your draws, but otherwise, just create 2 3/3 tokens, good for the aggressive decks, having more board presence, go wide strategy, or the defensive decks just having some more chump blockers, stall up the game, or gum up the board. Overcome over here is sorcery speed, anthem, like buff effect, buff up your whole team. Sorcery speed, creatures you control get +2/+2, so that's a good stat boost for all of your creatures if you go wide, for example. And each of those creatures gain trample, so hopefully this spell will be used to close out the game, even though it is 5 mana. Epic Proportions over here, I think, is a bomb because it's a new inclusion for the 7th version, but the fact that it has flash, even though it is 6 mana, the fact that it has flash though is really what I think makes it a bomb. You can put on any creature; it's an enchantment aura. Maybe your opponent taps out. They develop their board and they attack in or something, or they spend all their mana on a spell, and it's not going to get countered. They attack in. You Epic Proportions at flash, instant speed. You put on one of your creatures, that creature all of a sudden gets a +5/+5 stat boost, and now all of a sudden has trample. So it can instantly turn a small creature into a big creature, or an already big creature into an even bigger one. And maybe on the backswing, after your opponent attacks, you trade it in, and maybe all of their creatures are tapped out or whatever, and then all of a sudden you swing in on the back end, on the backswing, and get lethal off of that, because all of a sudden you have a 5/5 creature, a +5/5 on one of your creatures with trample. So kind of a really game-changing effect in Epic Proportions, the fact that you can flash it in. Alright, so moving on into the multicolored creatures as well as the non-creatures. Both of them combined equal 30 as far as this cube goes. Now, having a bunch of multicolored cards can be really stressful for the players, because if you have a bunch of gold cards, it can really stress the mana base, as well as I think there's a reason why Ravnica Allegiance and Guilds of Ravnica, each of those came in with 5 guilds each as opposed to all 10 guilds, because as far as a limited format, it can be kind of chaotic. I think just having a solid monocolored base and then splashing in these gold cards to create some diversity is a good way to go. But that's not to say, with the most recent set being Ravnica Allegiance and the previous set being Guilds of Ravnica, that you couldn't increase the multicolored collection over here if you do so purchase this cube or design it to be this way. Because, for instance, with Azorius, as well as all of the guilds, there's 3 cards for each guild. So if you want to increase that from 3 to 4, if you want to increase the flavor, be a little bit more multicolored, you could do so. Maybe take out some monocolored cards, one of each, as well as some artifacts. You could probably squeeze in, one more card for each guild. So, starting into Azorius, we're gonna get 2 blink effects here: Momentary Blink and Turn to Mist. Momentary Blink has the built-in flashback, so it has that additional value from the graveyard. And with a blink effect like this, you can exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So if there's another end of the battlefield effect you can utilize, or if you're protecting it, maybe there's an opponent uses a removal spell on one of your creatures, you blink it, protect it, comes back as a new object, re-triggers its enter the battlefield effect. I decided to put it in both aggressively and defensively because I think it can be used in both kind of decks. Same with Turn to Mist, another instant. return that card to the battlefield owner's owner control at the beginning of the next end step. So this one isn't as instantaneous. You have to wait until the beginning of the next end step, but the fact that you could still protect a creature, this one actually you can use offensively a little bit more because you can take out their blocker, and it doesn't come back until until the beginning of the next end step. So for that one combat phase, you can use it. But at the same time, they do get another enter the battlefield effect, so just a heads up. But these Azorius cards right here, these blink effects, kind of add some dynamic play. Cloud Blazer, this one actually is a great enter the battlefield effect for both of these cards, where you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. Imagine using momentary blink twice on Cloud Blazer. That's not only does Cloud Blazer enter the battlefield, gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, momentary blink the first half, draw 2 more cards, gain 2 more life, and then flashback again from the graveyard, gain 2 more life, draw 2 more cards, so you can really abuse that effect. And also, as a 5-mana 2/2 flyer, not really where you want to be, but the fact that you do gain 2 life to stabilize, I think it's very Azorius kind of in the sense that you do draw the cards, stabilize with the life gain. So, but again, with Ravnica Allegiance, you can throw in, maybe one more Azorius card, maybe like the Griffin, like the 4/3 double color Griffin, the XXYY spells. Cards that each of the guilds got. You can probably throw that in here. We'll actually see some of those here in a second. Moving on into Dimir, we're going to see the House Guildmage. This is a 2-mana 2/2, but it can kind of lock down a creature. It doesn't actually tap them; they have to already be tapped. But target creature does untap during its controller's next untap step, so it's kind of a lockdown effect. Not really, because it doesn't really tap them. But if your opponent swings in, then you can keep one of their creatures locked down with that. You do have to tap House Guildmage as well, or you can just use its Surveil effect, which I think is better off in the kind of control style, control your draws kind of deck. In that defensive strategy as an early game drop, you can kind of filter out your early game plays if you don't have anything on turn 3. Artful Takedown, great solid removal spell. Instant speed, you can choose one or both. Tap target a creature, and then you can also remove a 4 toughness creature. Very, very good, solid removal. And then there's Rags to Riches, which is a 4-mana. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, so kind of like a board sweeper. A little bit weaker with only 2 toughness, -2/-2, but later on you can aftermath it. Cast it from your graveyard, and then exile it. And each opponent chooses a creature he or she controls, and you gain control of that creature. So if you can somehow get it down to only one creature, that's their biggest creature, you can really abuse that effect. But it's probably not as effective against the go wide token strategy, because they're just gonna choose one of their weakest creatures. But the fact that you use Rags hopefully should destroy all of the small creatures. Moving on into Rakdos, Spike Jester, 2-mana 3/1 with haste. A very aggressive play, very Rakdos aggressive kind of style of a card, but it does have that 1 toughness. Brawl Bash Ogre is a new inclusion, which I think is really, really nice for that red-black sacrifice archetype. 4-mana 3/3 menace is alright, but the fact that every time it attacks, you have the potential, it's a May, sacrifice another creature, you have the potential to pump it up +2/+2. Is really, really nice, especially with Menace. It becomes a 5/5 Menace, getting that, that damage in, as well as getting that, sacrifice trigger effects. In the black-red sacrifice deck, you can potentially really abuse Brawl Bash Ogre and get in for a lot of damage. Augur Spree over here is a 3-mana instant, and it could potentially be used as removal or for the aggressive decks to push in 4 damage if your creature has more than 4 toughness, because the target creature gets -4 toughness. So it could be used as removal, or for a bigger creature, could be used as more additional burn. Going on into Gruul, Draconic Disciple, I think is kind of a weird spot, because on its first half it's not evasive, so I probably shouldn't have labeled it evasive, but it does later in the game become a 5/5, 7-mana, tap, sacrifice it, and you get a 5/5 Flying Dragon, which I think is, I decided to label it as evasive, but that's kind of a slow evasive card. And I decided to put it both aggressive and defensively, because it's kind of like a 3-mana 2/2, but then it can also ramp out 1 mana. It might be a stretch in that sense, but I had a hard time labeling this card. But I think it could be used to ramp out into a 5-mana play, a 5-mana aggressive play. On turn 4, or in the defensive deck, if you can stall out, later it becomes a 5/5 flyer. So not really sure where to put this card, decided just throwing it into both. Robo-Belt Raiders, 4 mana for a 3/3, but whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on on Rubble Butt Raiders for each attacking creature you control, so this really promotes that go wide strategy. This is kind of a great payoff for that kind of strategy. Maybe you go with the goblins or all those token generators. Like I think green has a couple of them that we've seen, as well as red. Maybe you can go Naya tokens. Rubble Butt Raiders would be really, really good because if you have 4 or 5 creatures, all of a sudden it gets a counter for each attacking creature you control. So really, really cool. Rubble Hulk over here is a 6 mana. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control, so being a 6 mana play, it's going to come down as a 6/6. Or, earlier in the game, if you can't get there, you can use it as a Blood Rush. It's a Blood Rush ability, pay 3, discard Rubble Hulk, and target attacking creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of lands you control. So it could be used as a finisher, or just comes down later as a big game 6/6 dynamic. Scales up as the more lands you play. You could become a 7/7, 8/8, and so on. Or it can be used as an aggressive combat trick. Pushing that damage, or maybe target attacking creature. Just get that extra buff. And going on into Selesnya, Centaur Healer is a 3 mana 3/3, and only you gain 3 life, so you get that 3/3 body as well as getting that 3 life. 3/3 for 3 mana could help out in the aggressive decks, just getting a solid body, but also to stall out for the defensive decks. Maybe you want to establish. You get that 3/3 token, 3/3 body to trade with something, as well as get that life, help stabilize you. Live Champion over here is a 3 mana for a 2/2, but it could potentially be pumped up in the go wide strategy. If you have a bunch of tokens, you can tap any number of untapped creatures you control, so all of those tokens can now effectively boost up your Lidev Champion. Let's say you have 3 or 4 tokens. 4 tokens, all of them tap. Now Lidev Champion is swinging in for 6/6. It doesn't have built-in trample or an evasion effect or anything like that, but the fact that you can pump it up, as well as it has a built-in token generation effect where you can pay 5 to create a 1/1 soldier token with lifelink. It's really, really cool for that Selesnya token strategy. Conclave Cavalier over here is a 4 mana 4/4 with a vigilance. Not too exciting, but the fact that it has once it dies, it maintains board presence by creating 2/2 green and white elf knight creature tokens with vigilance, so it could really help out in that go wide strategy. You have that 4/4 on the first half, and then later on they have to deal with a 2/2. So decided to put it as a good curve topper for the aggressive decks, or as a stabilizing card. You trade in, and then after it dies, you get 2 more 2/2s. So could help stabilize for the defensive strategies as well. Moving on into the Orzhov colors. Hidden Stockpile over here is a 2 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So it could be used in the artifact, the aggressive token strategy where you sacrifice a bunch of tokens. Those are permanents, so they left the battlefield, and at the beginning of your end step, after they've been sacrificed, you create another 1/1 artifact creature token. So that again could also be used as sacrifice fodder, or defensively, every time one of your creatures dies, you just get another value chump blocker. And also, if you want to control your draws, you can pay 1 and sacrifice a creature and scry 1. So kind of an interesting card, but decided to put it both for the aggressive sacrifice strategies, as well as maybe for just to get extra value in the defensive decks, and also you can scry with it. It's kind of an interesting Orzhov black-white card. Moving on into Ariel, Knight of Windgrace, 4 mana for 4/4 with vigilance, and has the ability to later on generate 2/2 knight creature tokens with vigilance. So it could swing in and then generate a token on the second main phase. Or you can just wait until your opponent's turn and then generate a token. Maybe they attack in, and then all of a sudden you generate a token, and then, well, you're going to have a 4/4 blocker anyways with Ariel, so because you do have to tap it in order to, so yeah, maybe that doesn't make too much sense, but you could just generate a token on your opponent's end step. But its big payoff is its built-in removal, so you can tap X untapped knights you control, and you have to pay the black as well as tap Ariel, but the fact that you can It's kind of a dynamic removal, built-in removal. So it has to have destroy target creature with power X or less. So if you tap 2 untapped knights you control, you can destroy a target creature with power 2 or less. So the more knights you have, the fact that it can generate tokens in its own right. Maybe you go with a black-white knights theme. You can really start killing bigger creatures. So it's kind of an interesting card. Also, just very good 4 mana 4/4 stat line is pretty nice. So I decided to throw it in as a bomb. But that's just me though. But it's not really like a 5/5 flyer. But the fact that it generates its own tokens as well as potentially can remove stuff on its own, built-in removal. I think it could become a bomb. Pillory of the Sleepless is a 3-mana enchantment aura, and target creature, enchanted creature can't attack or block. So you throw this on your opponent's creatures, kind of like a Luminous Bonds effect. And enchanted creature has at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 1 life, so your opponent will lose 1 life. So not only can they not block or attack, they have this dead creature that's just constantly draining them for 1 life. So I really like that effect as an Orzhov inclusion. I decided to throw it in as well, it should be removal. I don't know why I didn't label it as removal. It should be removal. Sorry about that. Again, these labels are not perfect, but again, removal spells are nice in both aggressive and defensive decks. Going on into Golgari, we see another one of those XXYY cards in Golgari Find Broker. 3/4 body, but it's kind of like a Gravedigger. Brings target permanent, so not just a creature, but it can be like an enchantment aura, any kind of permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So you get that 3/4 body, which is a solid blocker, but just getting that extra value. Decided to throw in both as an aggressive deck option as well as a defensive card, but it is a little bit slower, so it might be more on the defensive side. But you could get back an early game drop that might have been traded off. So I don't know. Zoni 1009 is a 6 mana 2/3, very poor stat line for 6 mana, but its payoff is the undergrowth mechanics. So that's why I included it as a bomb. So if you have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard, once it comes down onto maybe you're playing a heavy creature-based deck, like 20 creatures in your limited deck. Now all of a sudden, you have like 5 or 6 in your graveyard, and then boom, Izoni comes down. You get 5 1/1 creature tokens, insect creature tokens that could also be used defensively, kind of stall out the game. You can pay a green and a black to sacrifice another creature, and you gain 1 life and draw a card. So could also be used as a sacrifice outlet. Maybe in a Jund sacrifice deck or just a green black sacrifice, but otherwise the payoff with the undergrowth could potentially just get a huge board state, so I include it as a bomb. Brood Butcher over here is a 5 mana for a 3/3, so pretty poor stat line for a 5 mana play, but I decided to also label it as a bomb because it could affect the board state by having built-in removal. So it could be another sacrifice outlet for that kind of sacrifice archetype. When Brood Butcher enters the battlefield, you create another 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token, and that creature token can be later used as a kind of a ramp for 1 colorless mana. Or you can just have an additional 1/1 body as a creature token, and you can pay a green and a black similarly to Izoni and sacrifice a creature, and target creature gets -2/-2, so you can really start pinging your opponent's board state. You do have to invest 4 mana and sacrifice 2 creatures to destroy a 4 toughness creature, but just the fact that you have that potential to affect the board state in that sense, I think could be a bomb in that kind of sacrifice archetype. And moving on into Simic. So Simic, is one of those more recent guilds from Ravnica Allegiance. So, when I first saw this, I was thinking, oh man, I want to throw in Shark Crab in here because Shark Crab's that awesome, So that's what I'm saying. Like you can, with the most recent sets of the Ravnica sets, Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, you can probably amp these up 1 more card just to throw in an extra, some more flavor into the mix into this cube. But I think 3 for each guild is good enough because you don't want to have too many gold cards, I don't think. But yeah, just I want to throw in Shark Crab. Any place I can throw in Shark Crab, I'm throwing in Shark Crab. But anyways, starting off with Coiling Oracle, a 2 mana 1/1. But its benefit is that once it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top card of your library. so that's information your opponent will see as well. But if it's a land card, you put it on the battlefield, so it's kind of like a ramp effect. And if it's not a land, you just put it into your hand, so it could potentially just net you at 1 card. Anyways, Tatiova, Bethic Druid, 5 mana for a 3/3. This card could potentially be a bomb because every time you play land, you gain 1 life and draw a card, so it could stabilize you. I decided to put it in more of the defensive category because it is a 5 mana for a 3/3. Nothing really special as far as stat line, but you know, it could be seen as a bomb because for each land you play, it could get out of control as the game goes on and on. You could potentially gain like 3 life, draw 3 cards over the course of the game when this is out. But you know, it's not like, you know, it could easily be removed with that 3 toughness, so I'm not really sure if it's a bomb or not. Has the potential to be, though, if you can really get some insane value off of it, though. Urban Evolution is a 5 mana sorcery. You know, just a pretty slow card for a sorcery 5 mana play, but you know, you get to draw 3 cards and you play an additional land this turn, so I think that's more of a defensive kind of style. You know, refill your hand. Maybe it's an aggressive, I mean, because you do net 2 cards out of it, so if you need more gas, but, you know, being a 5 mana play, I decided to label it as more of a defensive card. Alright, so going on into Is It, which is pretty exciting. We see a brand new inclusion in League Guildmage. I really like this card because it could create some dynamic plays with its copy effect. For instance, if you have a shock, you can spend, you know, the 1 red for the shock as well as 2. You know, the 1 as well as the additional red, tap it, so 3 mana total for, you know, 2 shocks is really nice. Or, you know, later on in the game, you can just draw a card. Pretty interesting card, could allow for some flexible plays, especially in that burn, you know, blue-red deck with Murmuring Mystic as well as Gutter Snipe, for instance. Decided to put it in both aggressive decks as well as, you know, defensively. Maybe in a Jeskai deck, this card could be your draw engine in this slower, you know, draft format. So yeah, I decided to throw in for both. Crackling Drake over here, I think, is a bomb. This is you know, part of that XXYY cycle. But the fact that, you know, it enters the battlefield, it replaces itself immediately is awesome. But then you get a 4 toughness flyer, and it's dynamic as far as power, based off of the instant sorceries in exile as well as your graveyard. It can easily become, you know, a 5+ power creature. You know, that's why Is It Drakes is still prominent, is because, you know, Crackling Drakes, Enigma Drakes, they're scalable. And now they have Terramander anyways, but you know, Crackling Drake is a really strong part of that deck because it, you know, filters itself out, and just the fact that it becomes a dynamic flyer as far as power. Really, really great card. Decided to label it as a bomb, as well as having that, you know, built-in evasion with flying. Really great card for the Is It colors. Hypothesizzle is an instant speed removal, 5 mana. You do get to draw 2 cards though, but you know, you have the potential to discard a non-land card, and when you do, it deals 4 damage to target creatures. So kind of a, you know, slow, you know, 5 mana play. It is instant speed though, so you can instep it on your opponent's turn, and you know, you can pitch maybe like a 1 mana like opt or something, or yeah, just something that's not really useful, and deal 4 damage to target creatures. So but you'll usually take a removal anytime you can get it, and Hypothesizzle is kind of an interesting Is It removal spell. So, and last but not least is Boros, I believe. I think this is the last one. And Integrity Intervention is, you know, it's a removal on its second half with Intervention. 4 mana for deal 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. So, you know, get that stabilizing effect for the defensive decks, or you can use it aggressively. You know, it could also help out in the aggressive decks as well. Just a lot of flexibility in this card. On its first half, Integrity, it's just a standard instant speed combat trick of +2/+2, so maybe you get a favorable trade in the early game, or just later on in the game, you can use the intervention half to just, you know, essentially lightning helix the target, and you gain 3 life. So, moving on into Sky Knight Legionnaire, 3 mana 2/2 flying haster. A great aggressive Boros card, you know, has that built-in evasion, very aggressive play with the haste. So if you're building a Boros deck, you know, throw this in here, you'll be glad you did, because, you know, just a Sky Knight Legionnaire, 2/2 flyer with haste is solid, aggressive, you know, stats. Tiana, Ship's Caretaker. Not really sure if this is an aggressive card being a 5 mana play, but I decided to throw it in there as well because it does have the first strike as well as the flying, so it's really hard to deal with in the air. So it could potentially be a good curve topper in that kind of style of a deck, getting that flying first striker. But what's really impressive, if you are in that aura equipment strategy, if any of those get put into the graveyard, you may return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So if your opponent somehow removed one of your creatures and they have an aura attached to it, the creature goes to the graveyard, but the aura can be returned back into your hand. So, or if your opponent has artifact removal for your equipment, Tiana could really have that recursion. But 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer first striker. It's not a stat line that I see too often, but it's a little bit slower. But also, having that evasion and first strike is really hard to deal with. So I decided to throw it in for both aggressive and defensive strategies. But yeah, it's probably open to debate for the aggressive deck being a 5 mana play. But for that Boros aura and equipment strategy, could really be a good top end curve topper there. Okay, so we're going to be going into the colorless creatures first, including the vehicles. So we're going to see Hedron Crawler over here, and it's a 2 mana for an 0/1, and you can tap it, and it's essentially like a Land War Elves. So you can create 1 mana, colorless mana to your mana pool. So even though it is colorless mana, still helps ramp out into things. And also it's a 2-drop, so being colorless, you can throw it into a vast majority of decks and ramp out into like turn 3 play land, and you can play a 4-drop, for instance. Sky Skiff is a 2/3 flying vehicle, so it needs to be crewed. So you tap any number of creatures you control with power 1 or more. So if you have like a Land War Elves, for instance, or like a 1/1 token, all of a sudden you can crew it, and now you have a 2/3 flyer. So maybe get some favorable trades in combat, or just go over the top. Now your 1/1 token isn't as useless, and you can crew this. It can become an artifact creature and swing in for damage, flying damage for 2/3. Suspicious Bookcase over here. Decided to throw it in for both the aggressive and the defensive decks because its ability is, you pay 3 and tap it, and target creature can't be blocked this turn, so could be helpful to push in that extra damage, or just in the defensive strategy, 2 mana 0/4 could gum up the ground. Voltaic Servant over here is a 2 mana 1/3, so a defensive kind of stat line, and at the beginning of your end step, untap target artifact. So this has the potential to, you can use maybe like an Arcane Encyclopedia and get an additional draw, or some way where you can abuse that effect of untapping a target artifact. You can use it again. Chamber Sentry over here has removal. It's a dynamic variable spell, so you have to it comes down with +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it, so it's kind of like that converge effect. But if you're playing 3 colors, 2 colors, it comes in as a 2 mana 2/2, which is totally fine, being a bear. And later on, you can remove a +1/+1 counter, or both +1/+1 counters, and deal X damage to any target based off of how many counters you removed. So if it comes down as a 2/2, you can later on pay 2, tap it, remove 2 counters, and shock something, shock a creature, and remove a creature, or finish off a creature, or use it as a last, because you can also use it as any target, so you can use it as burn. Or if you're playing 3 colors, the more colors you're playing, 5 color shenanigans, this card really becomes insane then if you're playing rainbow colors, because if you spend one of each color, you can return Chamber Sentry from your graveyard to your hand, and if you have done that, well, you have access to all 5 colors of mana, so it's going to come down later on as a 5 mana 5/5, and you can even use more removal, remove more counters off of it. So very interesting card. Glad to see it in here still for those 3 color to 5 color shenanigan decks. Easter Glider is a 3-mana 2/1 flyer. So 2 power for a 3-mana play. You can throw it in any deck, but it can't block, so it's mainly an evasive, aggressive creature. Skittering Surveyor, 3 mana for 1/2, but you search your library for a basic land card, so just help establish your mana base. Skyscanner, it's a 3 mana for a 1/1, but it does filter itself out, so once it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So it could be used for the aggressive or the as a defensive play, as a chump blocker, or just as an additional 1/1 evasive threat to keep on plugging in for damage. Sleek Schooner over here, 3 mana for a 4/3, but it is a vehicle, so it's not an actual artifact creature. It has to be crewed. So you have to crew 1, tap any number of creatures. Again, those 1/1 tokens that it's not doing much on the ground. Well, now all of a sudden it can crew your Sleek Schooner. It's a 4/3 now. So just another way for to push in the extra damage for the aggressive decks, or defensively to turn your 1/1s into 4/3s that you can trade up into. But that might be a stretch for a defensive deck. I don't know if like a control deck would utilize this card. I think it's more of an aggressive card. Filigree Familiar is a 3 mana for a 2/2 body. Doesn't have evasion, but once it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and when it dies, you draw a card. So I think this is more of a good stabilizing card. You get that chump blocker, 2/2 blocker, as well as gaining 2 life, and once it dies, you get another card, so it kind of replaces itself. Moving on into the last piece of the 3 mana plays, 3 mana creatures for Colorless, is the Pilgrim's Eye. It's a 3 mana for a 1/1, similar to a Skyscanner. It has built-in flying, so it's an evasive threat. But you search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand. So it's kind of like Skittering Surveyor mixed in with the Skyscanner. You can throw it into your 3-color, 5-color shenanigans deck, fix your lands. It's probably it's not very aggressive, but it's just a 1 mana 1/1 fly. I mean, a 3 mana 1/1 flyer. Start pinging in for that additional damage, as well as draw an extra land. So I decided to label it as well as for both aggressive and defensive decks. Jorah's Familiar, 4 mana for a 2/2 flyer. So this one's kind of slow, being 4 mana just for a 2/2. But it does help ramp out your historic spells, which are historic, legendaries, and sagas. So if you're playing, for instance, there's Meteor Golems in here. This can help bring down Meteor Golem from 7 mana to 6 mana. Or just any kind of legendary creature, it can help ramp them out. Juggernaut over here is a 4 mana 5/3. So 3 toughness is, for 4 drop. And it has to attack each combat. It can't be blocked by walls, but the fact that it has 3 toughness, it can easily be traded in, but its stat line overall, 5 power is definitely an aggressive kind of play. Treasure Keeper over here is a 4 mana 3/3, and I think can be used for both aggressive decks, for the sacrifice decks, for instance, or as a defensive, blocker, 3/3 blocker that, when Treasure Keeper dies, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card with converted mana cost 3 or less, and you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So it could be a creature, it could be, any non-land card with CMC 3 or less, and being able to cast it for free is pretty nice. And then all of those other cards that were revealed are just put onto the bottom of your library in a random order, so they're not like put into the graveyard, so you can't really mill yourself out. Seems like a good value card. So I decided to throw it in or label it as both an aggressive card as well as a defensive card, because I don't know, I think both kind of styles of decks can use that free cast once it dies. And moving on into the big bombs for the artifact creatures. And Scuttling Doom Engine is a 6 mana 6/6, so it fills in that vanilla test really well. It has can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it can't be chump blocked by 1/1 creature tokens or 2/2s. But it's what really makes it a bomb, I think, is once not only do they have to deal with a 6/6, but after it dies, it can deal 6 damage to target opponent. Just as an additional burn. 6 damage burn is just really nice. That's why I think it's definitely a bomb. And could be a curve topper as a top deck for an aggressive deck. I don't know, that might be a stretch because it is 6 mana, but You know, if you're trying to get that additional burn, you're getting a 6/6 out of it. Of course, it is slower and it's kind of like not really in line with the aggressive deck theme of, you know, playing a bunch of 1 drops to 3 drops, curving out really well. Because, you know, 6 mana, you're probably not going to be able to play this card until like turn 7, turn 8 anyways. So, you know, it just might be a bomb. It might be good for like the, you know, burn decks in blue-red. I don't really know, or maybe just as a control finisher. But yeah, decided to throw it in as an aggressive label since it can, you know, nuke down for 6 damage to your opponent's face. So, you know, that might be a stretch though. So it, you know, could be debated that it's mislabeled here. But and last but not least is that Meteor Golem that I was talking about. 7 mana for a 3/3 is really, really poor stat line. But the fact that it is colorless, you can jam it in pretty much any deck, and it's built-in removal, so it's a built-in 2-for-1, because you destroy, once it enters the battlefield, you destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls, kill their biggest creature, and then all of a sudden you have a 3/3 body. It's, of course, it is very, very slow, but it is built-in removal onto a creature, kind of that 2-for-1. You can trade it in into another 3/3 that your opponent may have, nuke down their biggest creature. So yeah, you can jam it in any deck. Alright, so going into the non-creatures for colorless, we're going to see Blood Tallow Candle, which is kind of a slow removal spell, but later on in the game it can take out a 5 toughness creature. Target creature gets -5, -5, so a good kind of slow removal that could be jammed into any deck. Short Sword over here is 1 mana for, you know, equip 1. You have to pay 1, and then you have to equip another 1 to attach to target creature, and it gets +1/+1. So, you know, good for the Boros, Aura equipment strategy with Danitha and Champion of Flame, etc. Explosive Apparatus over here, another removal spell that you know, can be jammed into any deck because, you know, it's colorless. You gotta pay the 1 mana up front, and then later on in the game you have to spend 3 and tap, sacrifice it to deal 2 damage. Now it could be used for any target, which is pretty nice, but overall, 4 mana investment to deal 2 damage isn't really great removal, but the fact that it is colorless and you can jam it in any deck is pretty nice. Traveler's Amulet, it's kind of a slower card. You know, you have to pay 1 to cast it and then pay another 1 and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land, but could help establish your mana base for, you know, your 3-color, 4-color, 5-color shenanigans decks, or, you know, just to establish your mana base. Pacification Array is actually might be a low-key bomb, I think, because it's kind of like Icy Manipulator, except you get it earlier, where it's, you know, you spend 1 mana and then later on spend 2 and tap it, and you're gonna tap target artifact or creatures, so you can lock down something at the beginning of combat before declare attackers, or you can negate one of their, like for instance Arcane Encyclopedia, we'll see here in a second, where they can't use it. So kind of an interesting card. Could be used aggressively to tap down one of their blockers, or defensively where you can just lock down their biggest creatures. So this card might be a low-key bomb though, because of that effect, especially since it's only 1 mana up front, and then yeah, 2 mana. Kind of you know, to get that effect is pretty nice. Marauder's Axe and Torch Gauntlet, 2 mana artifacts, equipments that you know, you have to equip for 2. And it gives +2 power. Doesn't increase toughness, but again, with you know, Champion of Flame, or you know, Valduk with the equipment and auras, another payoff. Same with Jousting Lance and Kite Sail, some more equipment, artifact equipment. But Jousting Lance, you know, gets +2, +0, and then on your turn, the equipped creature gets first strike. So I decided to label it as evasive because you know, chances are your opponent's not going to want to trade into that kind of creature. You know, especially if it's on like a 3/3. Now it's a 5/3 with first strike, so it's going to you know, create some unfavorable trades with that first strike and you know, that power boost. It does require a 3 to equip though, but for the aggressive decks, I think it's really nice, especially in the Boros kind of like equipment auras payoff. Really, really key card, I think, with the first strike. Prismatic Lens, this one can help fix mana bases. Otherwise, it's just a 2 mana rock that can help ramp you up. Again, you can jam it into, you know, just to help ramp, maybe in a green deck, or you know, if you're in a 3-color, 4-color, 5-color shenanigans, you can convert one of your manas into mana of any color. So decided to throw it into the aggressive label because maybe you have a turn 4 bomb like that Goliath in green, the Golgari Goliath that has the scavenge, the 4 mana 5/5. So you play Prismatic Lens, and then turn 3, play your land, and then you can ramp out into that 4-drop, that 4 mana 5/5. So could be an aggressive card, or defensively ramp out into your bigger in-game threats. Kite Sail over here is gives equipped creature +1, so a small power boost, but the main thing is it gives it flying, so it gives you that evasion. Really nice for that another equipment payoff. And Prophetic Prism. Once it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So 2 mana for filters itself out, but also can help fix your mana base. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You do have to pay that 1 mana, so you have to essentially convert mana. So yep, could be good for just some general color fixing, along with Manalith over here. Add 1 mana of any color, 3 mana. Could help those for those 5-color decks if you want to play 5-color shenanigans. But moving on into Sigiled Sword of Valoron, 3 mana for, you also have to equip 3, so it's kind of a heavy mana investment, but once you do, the equipped creature gets +2 power, gets vigilance, and it's a knight. So it could help with that aerial knight synergy. But anytime that equipped creature attacks, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance that's also attacking. So yeah, very, very interesting card. Could pump out a lot of tokens, especially if you can always swing in with the creature, with the equipped creature. So kind of an aggressive card. But yeah, I think it's an awesome inclusion for the equipment payoffs. Arcane Encyclopedia over here, 3 mana. You do have to spend 3 mana and tap it to draw a card, so kind of a high mana investment, but if you can use this as a draw engine, could help out in those defensive decks. You can do a board sweeper, or early in the game, play this, and then later on draw into your board sweepers. Try and find a way to draw into those. Just a great card to kind of maintain that card advantage for those kind of slow defensive decks. Captain's Hook, it's 3 mana, only equip 1, so 4 mana investment overall to equip a creature. That equipped creature gets +2 power, gets menace, so it's kind of an evasive ability. And this one doesn't really matter that much, but it's also a pirate in addition to its other types. And this one's kind of interesting. Whenever it becomes unattached from a permanent, destroy that permanent. So you don't really want to start equipping this Captain's Hook around to different creatures. You really want to maintain this on one creature, because otherwise, if you equip it to another creature, you have to destroy the previously attached one. So just keep that in mind. But overall, getting that +2 power as well as menace is good for those aggressive, equipment decks, or just as an aggressive, evasive ability. Manalith again, fix those mana bases for those 5-color shenanigan decks or 3-color decks. Moonglove Extract. 3 mana for, you'd have to sacrifice it, but deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Again, good general removal that you can pack into any deck. It only reaches up to 2 toughness creatures, but could potentially be used as burn to finish off an opponent, just for the extra burn damage. Arask Relic, another mana rock, 3 mana. It only adds colorless mana, but once you do ascend, you get 10 permanents, you get the City's Blessing, you can tap, sacrifice it, and you gain 3 life as well as draw a card, so it kind of filters itself out after it's done its job. Maybe, in the early game, it's already done, ramping out into stuff, and later on you can just, you don't really need it anymore, you don't need its ability to ramp out, so you can just sacrifice it and gain 3 life and draw another card. Seer's Lantern, another 3 mana rock, only adds colorless as well, but in this case could be used in those slow controlling decks where you have to pay 2 and tap it to scry 1. And last but not least is Strider Harness. This is more of an aggressive equipment where it gives +1/+1 as well as haste, so it is kind of a 3 mana just to play it, but only 1 mana to equip. But later on in the game, if you have big chunky creatures, 5 mana plays, 6 mana plays, all of a sudden they get haste. Pretty nice, especially if they have like flying, for instance. because it's only equip one, so you can play your 4 mana, 5 mana flyers, and then have some extra mana, 1 mana extra, and then give it flying. Going on into 4 mana colorless artifact creatures, non-creatures. Icy Manipulator over here is a pretty solid, for both the aggressive as well as the defensive decks. You spend 1, tap it, and you can tap down a target artifact, creature, or land. So for the controlling decks, you can tap down and lock down before combat, or at the beginning of combat, their biggest creature to prevent them from attacking. Or an aggressive deck, as a curve topper, you can use this to always tap down one of their blockers. So I like the flexibility of Icy Manipulator here. Even though it is a 4 mana play for the aggressive decks, kind of a slow top end. But I think just having that recursive ability to tap down their creature to one of their blockers so they can't block, I think is pretty nice. Oracle's Vault. This one's another slow card at 4 mana, more for the defensive decks, because you had to spend 2 mana and tap it. So you had to pump more mana into this card, and you exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn, you may play that card. So it's kind of like an experimental frenzy where you play the top card of your library, the potential to play it. You can play lands, I assume, as well. And after you do that, you put a brick counter on Oracle's Vault. Now, once you get 3 brick counters, you activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Oracle's Vault. So once you do that, you can tap this, exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. So after you've invested a lot of mana into this, later on you start getting some free spells later on into the game. So decided to throw it into the defensive decks. Because it is kind of a large investment of mana to put into this card. All right, so finishing off, and we're going to be going into non-basic lands. You're going to get the whole cycle of Guild Gates, really cool, because like Circuitous Root brings out the Guild Gates. Also, just along with these enter the battlefield tapped lands, you get this full cycle. A lot of flexible dual lands to help multicolored decks, 3-colored, dual-colored decks, all the way up to 5-colored shenanigan decks. You always want to have a good mana base to, give your players a good reason to go into multiple colors. So, and then you're also going to get the Memorial to cycle from Dominaria, where they all are monocolored and they enter the battlefield tapped, but they all have additional effects. Memorial to Folly, I think, is a really good one. Bring back a target creature from your graveyard to your hand. But things like Memorial to Unity also has a similar effect where you can, look into your library and you can reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Memorial to Genius could help out for those blue control decks because you can pay 5, tap it, and sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. Having that built-in card draw onto a land later in the game could be helpful to maintain that card advantage. Memorial to Glory over here I think is one of the weaker ones, but still could help out if you're going wide or if you're having that sacrifice deck. Having that built into a land to create 2 creature tokens could actually be really helpful for those kind of like sacrifice decks. And Memorial to War I think is probably the weakest one because it's 5 mana first of all, and its effect isn't that great because it's all it is. You have to sacrifice itself and you destroy target land, and really this is really only good against lands that are kind of overpowered, because otherwise, to destroy a target land, to set your opponent down 1 land, you have to spend 5 mana, so this is, at minimum, you're not really going to play this on turn 5 anyways, so it's not really like a tempo effect where you destroy one of your opponent's lands, so later in the game, if you destroy one of their lands, it doesn't really matter that much, so this is probably the weakest one, Memorial to War. It's mainly used against I think more beneficial for like flip cards that turn into lands, like the Ixalan cards that, like a Search for Ascanta turns into a land, so you can destroy that land. I think that's really where this kind of effect shines, but otherwise that's probably the weakest one. And you are not going to get the deserts because those have been cycled out, but you are going to get these gold lands where you can filter out you had to pay 1 mana and then tap it for a mana of any color. Otherwise, they just produce colorless mana. Gateway Plaza, you have to spend that 1 mana up front because otherwise it gets sacrificed. So, but still helps out with the color fixing. Terramorphic Expanse, along with Evolving Wilds, again, more cards to help fix those mana bases that are reaching into 3 colors plus. Cradle of the Cursed, just a colorless land, but later can be sacrificed and become a 2/2. So maybe if you are, in the sacrifice deck, this could be an additional pickup later, in the pack. And no one really wants it, and then all of a sudden one of your lands can become a creature that can become sacrificed later. So could help out in that kind of style of a deck. And this is a new inclusion, brand new for version 7. They took away the deserts, but they included just a brand new inclusion in Rogue's Passage from Ultimate Masters, where it can tap and add colorless mana, but later in the game it has a really useful effect where you have to spend 4 mana, but target creature can't be blocked this turn. So giving that evasion for one of your big creatures could be really helpful. Alright, so I'm going to get into some kind of like mock-up draft decks. These aren't, I guess, completely accurate. I'm just kind of give a small simulation, a small sample size of what a deck could look like. So right here we're going to have a mono-white aggressive, not necessarily mono-white weenie. There's not a ton of 1-drops, but let's say you're drafting and you manage to get a lot of 1-drops and 2-drops. You can go for that aggressive mono-white weenie archetype. Right here, we have Short Sword, Jousting Lance, Kite Sail as some small equipment buffs. We have things like Pride of Conquerors to promote the go wide strategy and start swinging in, trying to ascend. Raise the alarm, create some tokens. Hazda Marshal creates more tokens. So right here, kind of curves off. The top end is 4 mana and 5 mana with the Venerated Loxodon, which can be ramped out, convoked out with some earlier game plays, some earlier game creatures. We have like Attended Knight, Call the Cavalry, creates more tokens, so create a wider board presence. But we also have some flying threats, Healer's Hawk, Stormfront Pegasus, Leonin Sky Hunter, Pegasus Corsair, just some aerial threats to always push in that damage. And then we have some some equipment buffs to increase the power of our earlier game creatures, and we have some small removal in the sense of Conclave Tribunal and Luminous Bonds, just to take away their biggest blocker. And Inspiring Unicorn, Venerated Loxodon provide, along with like Pride of Conquerors, these cards provide the anthem effects of buffing up your team. Loxodon actually leaves counters on them, so that's kind of like a small simulation of what a mono white deck would look like. Let's take a look at a maybe like an Esper control, kind of like with some Dimir cards. Sanitarium Skeleton is just a small chump blocker that can constantly chump block. Mystic Archaeologist can lead to some card advantage. Omen Speaker, you can filter out your draws. Same with House Guildmage, you can do some surveilling to filter out your draws. But we also have a lot of removal here with Disfigure. Blood Tallow Candle can later become, take out a 5 toughness creature. Severed Strands, again, just another removal, even though you do have to sacrifice one of your creatures. Last Gasp, another removal spell. We got some card draw over here with Dark Bargain and Painful Truths. Fiend Hunter, another removal. We also have some stall effects. Time of Ice and Icy Manipulator can lock down your opponent's biggest creature. And we have some board wipes and Planar Outburst, as well as Rags to Riches, so we can maintain the board state, clear the board. And later on, we can cast our bigger threats in Meteor Golem and Sphinx of Uthun, kind of to close out the game. Meteor Golem destroys one of their creatures, and Sphinx of Uthun is a big, ginormous, flying 5/6 that also knits you some card draw. So it's kind of a jank Esper control deck. Just wanted to give you a small simulation of what one of those could look like. Moving on into Red-Black Sacrifice. So this would be another kind of interesting archetype in this cube, where you have a bunch of sacrifice fodder in like Festering Mummy, Tenacious Dead, Carrier Thrall, Doom Dissenter, Reassembling Skeleton. All of these have, they leave a body left on the battlefield, or they're recursive. You can play them from the graveyard and constantly be sacrifice fodder. Also, we have some token generators and Goblin Instigator, Dragon Fodder, Hordling Outburst. Just having a wide array of creature tokens that you can sacrifice and use as for Vicious Offering, or for things like Ravenous Harpy, kind of buff Ravenous Harpy up. Same with Phyrexian Ghoul. You can just sacrifice creatures, and also more payoffs include Falkenrath Noble, where every time a creature dies, it deals 1 damage to your opponent and you gain 1 life. Or like a Brawl Bash Ogre, it's a 4 mana 3/3 with Menace, but then all of a sudden you can sacrifice a creature and it becomes a 5/5 with Menace, so it's just hard to deal with. And some more sacrifice payoffs towards the top end over here with Magma and Phyrexian Plague Lord. Both of these are 5 mana 4/4s, and they have you can sacrifice creatures and affect the board state. And Gruesome Menagerie brings back some 1-drops, 2-drops, and 3-drops, so you can use them again for sacrifice fodder. Or on the top end over here at 6 mana, you have Devil's Playground, which gives you 4 creatures as well. And not only can they be sacrificed, but they can also be used once they die to ping and affect the board state, or just burn off your opponent. So this is kind of what a red-black sacrifice deck, just jank, scramble them up all together, kind of see what it would look like. Now moving on into mono green, kind of a ramp deck with Arbor Elves, Llanowar Elves, kind of early game Mana Dorks, Druid of the Cowl, Naga Vitalists, Wall of Roots, and you can ramp up into like a Wolfbriar Elemental. Later in the game you can multi-kick it. You have a lot of Mana Rocks, Pilgrim's Eye, Orazca Relic. Orazca Relic is a Mana Rock. Pilgrim's Eye, you can draw a land from your deck. And we have something like District Guide as well to get another land. Hunt the Weak and Rabid Bite, some green removal spells that the green deck could use. And all the way on the top end over here, the payoffs for going, this mono green ramp would be, of course, Pelakka Worm as the very, very top end to kind of, it's a big ginormous creature, 7/7, and you gain 7 life, so kind of help stabilize some of the early game burn that you might have endured while you're establishing your mana. And we have Epic Proportions that flash, give a creature 5/5 at instant speed, which is really nice. Get a favorable trade, and then all of a sudden have a big ginormous creature. And then we have things like Elvish Apparition, Affectionate Indric, some other 6 mana plays. Affectionate Indric has built-in fight onto a 4/4 body, so you can take out one of their creatures, or like a Ridgescale Tusker, a 5 mana 5/5, but also pumps up all of your Mana Dorks, just puts a 1/1 counter on them, so just kind of buff up your whole team, create a bigger board state. Moving on into this blue-red Izzet spells, we have Lava Spike, doesn't affect the board state, only deals burn damage, but the fact that we can duplicate it maybe with League Guildmage, or get the payoffs with Electrostatic Field and Gutter Snipe, as well as, a Murmuring Mystic, or Skywise Teachings, or even Archaeomancer. We can get those payoffs for playing instants and sorceries. A lot of removal in this, deck, with Mizzium Mortars, Lightning Strike, even some counter spells like Cancel, Supreme Will, Mana Leak, and just a ton of payoffs in that sense. We have Chemist's Insight, Direct Current, so we get some additional value with the Jumpstart. Maintain our card draw with Arcane Encyclopedia, and then all the way over here on the top end, we drop a big fatty and Scuttling Doom Engine at 6 mana 6/6. But once it dies, it deals 6 damage to target opponent. So hopefully we'll be able to, have like Electrostatic Field, Gutter Snipe, Murmuring Mystic, trying to burn them down with our spells. And then all of a sudden we have this big ginormous bomb. And then once it dies, it deals another 6 damage straight to the dome. So that's kind of what an Izzet deck would look like as far as this cube. And moving on into like a Golgari, creature-based deck. Some early game, Death Touchers, a trade-in, stall the game, and then moving on, we have, like Burglar Rat, Dusk Legion Zealot, Elfish Visionary. By themselves, they're just chump blocker 1/1s, but, they have effects once they enter the battlefield, and then after they enter the battlefield, they've done their job. They're ready to be traded in and put into the graveyard. Then we have some 3-mana plays. Yavimaya Sapherd. With this strategy, we're just trying to stall the game out and get to our in-game bombs. Things like Dead Bridge Goliath, a 4-mana 5/5, all the way up to like an Azoni, 1,000-eyed. So we're looking to get our trades in, trade the board, stall the board, get all of our creatures into our graveyard, and then we have our big game in-game creatures. So over here we have even like the Priest of the Bloodright. If we can find a way to utilize Whisper Blood Liturgist and bring it back, or even like Golgari Findbroker, just kind of get that value, go to Value Town with the Golgari graveyard strategy. We can trade with Whisper. We can trade in our 1/1s and try and bring back one of our bombs from the graveyard. So that's kind of what a Golgari deck would look like. I have a graveyard Creature Matters deck. Now right here is a mono red, red deck wins aggro strategy. In a draft, the 1-mana red creatures will probably get passed on if that person's not in the red deck aggro deck. So if you're not in that archetype, you're just gonna pass it along. No one's really gonna want it. So that one player can probably pick them all up, pick up all the 1-drop, aggressive 1-mana plays, and get all the 2-drops, fill out your curve, really be an aggressive deck, and try and get your opponent off guard by having a really consistent load to the ground red deck kind of strategy. Things like with Flame of Keld, even having some equipment like Marauder's Axe to keep on pushing in damage, some combat tricks like Run Amok. The Go White strategy is also promoted with Trumpet Blast. All your attacking creatures get +2/+0, and over here we have even a little bit of Goblin payout with Goblin War Chief, Volley Veteran, and we also have on the very, very top end, Charging Monstrosar, just to kind of have a top deck Lava Axe built into a creature kind of effect. But it could also be argued that reaching into 5 mana is kind of slow for this kind of strategy. But just you might throw it in there if you're drafting. And going on into this weird kind of like Bant green, blue, white kind of ramp deck. I don't know. I just kind of threw some stuff together. Things like a Lone Missionary will give you some health back. Dreamscape Artist will establish your mana along with Coiling Oracle, Rampant Growth, Farseek. Kind of a little of a ramp deck. You got the Mana Lith, Seer's Lantern, and on the top end you have things like Regal Caracol to ramp up into the 5-mana plays. Gin of Wishes, Sarah Angel. So you do get these in-game payoffs. We also have some stall effects with Baird, Steward of Argive. Tower Geist is a 4-mana 2/2 that replaces itself. You can filter out your draws. Ambassador Oak over here. Just establish your board, 4 mana for a 3/3 and a 1/1. It's a little bit of a token strategy here with Ovia Pashiri. And Ledev Champion, you can start generating tokens. Eldrazi Sky Spawner, so a little bit of a token strategy here. And on the very, very top end, we have Primordial Mist, which can also establish more of a board presence by manifesting at the top of your deck. And we also have that payoff of Deep Freeze as a removal, as well as Entrancing Melody to take control of the opposing creature. The biggest creature, if it's like a 5-mana creature, we do have to spend 7 mana to take their CMC 5 creature, but it's kind of one of the payoffs of going this ramp, weird kind of like Bant style deck. So this probably isn't really that good of a deck, but I just wanted to throw in some random stuff. I just trying to make some like kind of simulate what the decks would look like. But moving on, I'm going to show you the cards that have entered the void, that have been chopped from version 6. So we're no longer, there's no more Savannah Lions, which is kind of unfortunate, a 1-mana 2/1, but at the same time, it's also just a vanilla 1-mana 2/1. It's also been replaced by, I think, Dauntless Bodyguard, so it's kind of a 1-mana 2/1 with upside. Missing the Fencing Ace. I think that was kind of cool, 2-mana 1/1 that also, with the Aura Enchantment or Aura Equipment strategy. Throw all of your equipment and auras onto this guy, and it has built-in double strike. So, maybe it was too strong in that archetype. I don't know, why they took it out. I thought it was kind of cool, but could also, be argued that it was really, really strong. Stonehaven Outfitter over here. Another one of those payoffs for the +1/+1 for each equipped creature that you have, and whenever an equipped creature dies, you draw a card. So another one of those, bears with upside for the equipment deck. Kemba over here, I'm kind of sad to see go away. 3 mana 2/4 is kind of a pretty good value for that 3 mana. You've got that big toughness, 4 toughness creature with the huge upside of at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 2/2 token for each equipment attached to Kemba. So it doesn't have the aura payoff, but if you have a bunch of equipment and you attach them onto Kemba, if you have two, you're generating two 2/2 creature tokens at the beginning of your upkeep. That might be a little bit too strong, so maybe they took it out for that reason. Blinding Soul Eater over here, I could definitely see just being, maybe too much of an auto-include, being colorless, and then you can also pay life, so maybe it was just being seen in too many decks for that kind of strong of an effect to tap target creature, so maybe that's why that was removed. Geist Honored Monk, 5 mana, kind of a dynamic stat line where it's based off how many creatures you control, so I think it's been replaced by other 5 mana drops. Swords to Plowshares, just probably a really strong 1 mana instant exile target creature. It doesn't really matter that your opponent gains life. For 1 mana, it affects the board state, exiles the biggest creature your opponent has. Very strong effect, instant speed. I could definitely see why this was removed, but at the same time, it's kind of, it's a nice solid removal spell, but it might have been too strong. Fumigate over here, maybe they wanted to take away some of the board wipes just to alleviate the board for the control decks to really dominate, so maybe taking away 1 board wipe in white and Fumigate, maybe that was the reason why it was taken out of version 7, for version 7. And Intangible Virtue, a 2 mana enchantment where creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance, so maybe it just wasn't working out as the designers have seen, because it only affects creature tokens, so maybe they didn't think it was as useful. Hieromancer's Cage over here, it's a 4 mana enchantment removal, exile target non-land permanent until an opponent permanent opponent controls until Hieromancer's Cage leaves the battlefield, so maybe it was a little too slow, but I think it's a good removal spell for 4 mana. Welcome Turk, 2 mana 2/1 flyer. For the blue decks, a lot of flyers for the blue decks. Evasion Pioneer over here is just a 1/2, but also comes with a 1/1 Flying Thopter token. Frost Links just comes down as a 3 mana 2/2, and it taps target creature, and that creature doesn't untap during your opponent's next untap step. It doesn't untap. And Mana War over here, I thought was kind of, I really like Mana War. 3 mana 2/2, enters the battlefield, return target creature, so it can be one of your own creatures, so kind of sad to see this one go. Argent Sphinx over here, 4 mana for a 4/3 flyer, but has that Metalcraft where it can only be used if you control 3 or more artifacts, and you essentially flicker Argent Sphinx, so if it's being targeted by removal, you can exile it for 1 blue, exile Argent Sphinx, and it comes back onto the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step, so just a way to kind of have a built-in evasion, or some way to survive removal. Watcher in the Mist over here, kind of sad to see this one go as well. It's a 5 mana 3/4, and also surveils 2, so it can help those control decks filter out their draws, as well as have a 3/4 solid defender flying creature. Horizon Scholar, 6 mana 4/4 with the flying, as well as the Scry 2, but again, this one was deprecated. So now moving on to the blue instants and sorceries, Arcane Denial, Counterspell. Maybe these were too strong. Fumble over here. Exclude. I'm kind of sad to see go. Counter. It's kind of like an Essence Scatter with built-in card draw. Quasi Duplicate, I also was kind of sad to see go as well. I thought that would have been cool in the blue-red Is It burn deck. Create a copy of Gutter Snipe, for instance. Really go off by making a bunch of Gutter Snipes. I thought would have been pretty interesting. But they took it out. But yeah, Kefnet's Last Word, gain control of target artifact, creature, or enchantment. So it's kind of like a mind control effect for 4 mana. Maybe it was a little bit too strong. Take the best creature, even though your lands don't untap during your next untap step. Still, for 4 mana, it's pretty good for a mind control effect. Patient Rebuilding, probably a little bit too slow for 5 mana for its effect, where it's kind of like a mill, but there's not a lot of mill support. And also kind of a little bit of card draw for each land your opponent discards from the top of their library into the graveyard, you draw a land. You draw a card for each land. So maybe it's a little bit too slow even for the control decks. Vampire Lacerator, kind of sad to see this one go as well. It's a 1-mana 2/2. Promotes the aggressive black decks. Gnawing Zombie, I can understand why this one was gone, is because, not only do you have to sacrifice a creature, but you also have to pay the 2 mana each, and on top of that, it's just not as good as something where, you don't have to pay that 2 mana for every time you want to sacrifice a creature, so I could definitely see why this one wasn't, really working out, also being just a 1/3 body. Bane Whip, a Punisher, definitely kind of sad to see this one go because I don't know, I just really like it with, a target creature gets a -1/-1 counter, and then all of a sudden you can just blow it up by sacrificing, as well as paying 1 life, sacrificing itself. So, I don't know, it's like having removal built onto creatures. I think it's kind of nice. But maybe it was too strong, so I don't know. Death Boom Ballad doesn't really, it does leave a body on the battlefield after it dies, so it's just a 3-mana 3/2 otherwise. But Phyrexian Rager over here, 3 mana for a 2/2, and once it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So maybe this one was just seeing too much play in all the decks, where just getting being able to filter out and replace itself is really nice for a card as far as value goes. Understated Necrolysk, sad to see another sacrifice payoff go, but at the same time, maybe this one was a little bit too strong. I really don't know. This one I thought was a pretty decent payout with 4 mana 3/3, and then all of a sudden it can be buffed up and get Menace until end of turn, along with getting that counter. Only at sorcery speed though too. So Fallen Angel over here, 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer, but sacrifice at instant speed. You can buff up the Fallen Angel to get +2/+1 until end of turn. So maybe this one was a little bit too strong. It's floating in the air. You have like 4 or 5 tokens, and then all of a sudden you're sacrificing all of them before you connect. Sacrifice 4 creatures. All of a sudden get +8 in power. So maybe that was a little bit too strong, but. Gilt Leaf Winnower is a 4/3 with Menace for 5 mana, and when it enters the battlefield, it kind of has a removal spell built in, but it's kind of a weird removal spell. Only targets a non-elf creature whose power and toughness aren't equal. Still, love seeing removal spells built into creatures, but this one might have been a little bit too strong. Dark Ritual, 1 mana for generate 3 mana, net 2 mana, kind of ramp out in black. I just took it out. Yeah, maybe they just weren't seeing it used, I guess, in the best fashion, maybe in like an all-out aggro mono black deck or something. I really don't know. Maybe it just wasn't doing much as a spell in the cube. Altar's Reap over here. 2 mana, you gotta sacrifice a creature and then draw 2 cards, so maybe this one wasn't as effective either. Murder might have been too strong. 3 mana, destroy target creature. But solid removal spell, maybe it was too good. Consume the Meek, again, like with Fumigate, they're taking away another board wipe. In this case, it's an instant speed. Each creature with converted mana cost 3 or less can't be regenerated, so it's kind of like a Ritual of Suit, where it destroys creatures with CMC 3 or less. Unearth, sorcery speed, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Also has the built-in cycling, so Eviscerate, another removal spell that might have been too good. 4 mana, destroy target creature. And Deadly Designs. This one is kind of an interesting enchantment where both players can activate the ability. And once there are 5 or more plot counters on Deadly Designs, you sacrifice it and you can destroy up to 2 target creatures. So maybe it was too strong. Maybe it was a little bit, they just weren't seeing it. It wasn't that fun to play against, since you essentially can destroy 2 target creatures with 1 spell over the course of a game. So that one has been put into the void. It's no longer in version 7. Now, red creatures that are no longer in version 7 that have, that were previously from version 6, a lot of 1 mana 2/1s and Jackal Pup and a Fire Drinker Satyr. Maybe they wanted to, take away a little bit of the power level of the red deck win strategy. Dismissive Pyromancer over here. This one can, discard a card, draw a card. Another Sacrifice Outlet and Dark Dweller Oracle. these bears with upside. Maybe they just weren't seeing being played, a lot. Frenzied Goblin, I think honestly is really really strong. 1 mana for 1/1, but every time it attacks, you may pay an additional 1, and target creature can't block this turn. Might have been too good in that strategy, in the red deck win strategy. Mog Flunkies, 2 mana 3/3s are always, giving that to a red deck might be a little bit too much, so I can definitely see why this one was taken out, but I don't know. I like seeing that really strong 2-drop for the red deck. I think it's kind of cool, but I could definitely see why they took it out. On-Crop Crasher, another really, really strong card. 3 mana, 3/2. Already passes the vanilla test, more or less. It has built-in haste, and you can also exert it when it attacks. And if you do, target creature can't block this turn. So another way to get that red damage in, more damage in for the aggressive deck. Bogart Brute, 3 mana for a 3/2 with built-in menace. Kind of has that evasion. That might have been another really strong card, but sad to see another goblin go. Here's another Goblin and Pyrewild Shaman. This one might have been too strong as well with the Blood Rush. You can discard it for 2 mana and discard it, and target attacking creature gets 3 power and 1 toughness until end of turn, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, if Pyrewild Shaman is in your graveyard, you may pay an additional 3. If you do, return it to your hand, so that recursion might have been too strong with all that burst damage. Kuldotha Phoenix. It's another one of those Metalcraft payoffs where if you control 3 or more artifacts, you can activate its Metalcraft ability for 4. Return Kuldotha Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has haste and flying for 4/4. This one also might have been too strong of a build around for the artifact deck, getting that constant Phoenix recursion. So sad to see for sure. Lightning Bolts, 1 mana, deal 3 damage, very iconic spell, but also again, I think that's the reason why we don't see it in standard as an instant speed 1 mana. We do have Skewer the Critics, but that one's kind of conditional in its sorcery speed. So, having these 1 mana deal 3 damage effects might be too strong. So, maximize velocity. Kind of sad to see this one go for the blue-red jumpstart. Get the payoffs with the sorcery and instance. But this one might not have been that effective, so I really don't know. Krenko's Command, another one of those cards that generates creature tokens, in this case 2 1/1 goblin creatures. I'm really not really sure why they took this one out. Maybe there was too many cards with this effect. They wanted to include something else. Madcap Skills, this one is really strong. You get the 2 mana for a 3/0, 3 power enchantment. And also gives the creature menace. So for the aggressive decks, it might have been too strong, giving not only 3 power but also built-in evasion menace. And going out into green, Honored Hierarch, it has to connect before it can become Renown, and then after that it gains Vigilance, and you can add 1 mana of any color. But maybe it was just later in the game it just becomes a 1/1 and it can't really push in for damage. Maybe they took that one out for that. Primal Druid over here. When it dies, you may search your library for a basic land card. Otherwise, it's a 0/3, so it's it has to die first. Emerald's Evangel. Really interesting art, by the way. I mean, look at this. The guy's arms are all messed up. I mean, jeez. But anyways. Yeah, the art's crazy. This one is it's a 3 mana 3/2, but you can also sacrifice it. You have to tap, sacrifice it, as well as any number of other non-Eldrazi creatures. And the payoff is put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token for each creature sacrificed this way. So it replaces itself and also can turn your other non-Eldrazi creatures into bigger 3/2s. That might have been too strong for the tokens deck. Rishkar over here, Pima Renegade. Sad to see this one go. This one was from, I remember playing it with the green-black Constrictor Challenger deck. Really loved this card, at least as far as, putting a +1 counter on up to 2 target creatures. You can also target itself. And each creature you control, which has a counter on it, gets ability to ramp 1 green. So, that one might have been too strong as well. Beast Whisperer, another card that sad to see go, because the payoff is really really high. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. And Surak the Hunt Caller, 4 mana 5/4, where has Formidable at the beginning of your combat on your turn. If creatures you control have total power of 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste. So let's say for instance, it itself is a 5 power. All you need is 3 more power, and then all of a sudden you have the formidable, and your future big creature plays all of a sudden get haste. So maybe this one was a little bit too strong. So yeah, taking a look at the non-creature spells in green, Return to Earth. This one 4 mana, destroyed. Maybe this one was a little bit too flexible, but for 4 mana, I think it's fair. I'm not really sure why they took it out. Maybe there was something better. Cultivate, another one of those cards where just another ramp card. You can put one on the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. Lead the Stampede. This one I think maybe is seeing playing Pauper maybe, or like the Elves modern deck, I think, where you look at the top 5 cards of your library. So you may reveal any number of creature cards from among them and put them into your hand. Maybe it's a little bit too strong of an effect, especially maybe in that Golgari graveyard where it's mainly only creatures. You're playing 20 plus creatures, so yeah, maybe it's a little bit too strong in those kind of decks. I really don't know, but I still think it's a really cool card. Fertile Ground, 2 mana for a ramp ability. Can also fix, whenever Enchanted Land is tapped for mana, its control adds an additional 1 mana of any color, so maybe it was a little bit too flexible as far as fixing mana bases. Spire Patrol over here, 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you get that 3/2 flyer, but you also get that tap target creature, and it does untap during its opponent's next untap phase. So, but it's a very Azorius feeling card. It's a flyer with that built-in control effect. Kind of sad to see that one go as well. Timret, the Murder King, 2 mana for a 2/2. And you get that red black sacrifice. You get sacrifice another creature, deal 2 damage to target player, or you can when Timeret is in the graveyard, you could return Timeret from your graveyard to your hand. You have to pay 2 and sacrifice a creature. So maybe this one was a little bit too strong. I'm not really sure, but kind of sad to see another, red-black sacrifice card go away. Unlicensed Disintegration. This one might have been a little bit too strong, or maybe they wanted to steer away from this kind of card. Destroy target creature, instant speed. We've seen that they took away murder, so maybe they wanted to alleviate the really efficient removal spells that are non-conditional, and if you control an artifact, it deals an additional 3 damage. So with a Bomat Courier, for instance, it's an artifact creature, and you can deal additional burn in those kind of style decks. Burning Tree Emissary. This one is kind of interesting because you spend the 2 mana and it comes down as a 2/2 bear, and then once it enters the battlefield, it replaces its cost essentially by giving you another red and green mana. And Savage Ventmaw, 6 mana for a 4/4 flyer, maybe a little bit too slow, but every time it attacks, it gives you a crap ton of mana, 3 red and 3 green, and until end of turn you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. So of course you do have to reach 6 mana first, but if you think about it, you play that Savage Ventmaw on turn 6, or after you have 6 mana, 6 lands, and once you swing in, you have the 6 mana that you already have, and then you have an additional 6. So maybe potentially could have been really, really strong in this kind of cube. Claim Defiance, another one of those X variable spells, but in this case it says choose 1 or more, so you can choose all 3. Claim Defiance deals X damage to target creature with flying, deals X damage to target creature without flying, and deals X damage to target players. So let's say you do X equals 2, that's 4 mana, to deal 2 damage to target creature with flying, and 2 damage to target creature without flying, and then 2 damage to target player. It's a really good value in my opinion, even at sorcery speed, but maybe that was a little bit too strong of a card. Call of the Conclave, 2 mana for a 3/3, maybe it was a little bit too boring, that's why they took it out. I really don't know, just can only speculate. Kind of sad to see Sin Collector go away because it's I think it's a very Orzhov controlling card. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose an instant or sorcery from it and exile that card. So kind of an interesting effect for the control decks, like an Esper control deck. Poison Tip Archer, another payoff for the sacrifice archetype, but this time it's not the red black colors, it's green, black, the Golgari colors. Has the built-in death touch with reach, so it can trade into flyers, but you may be a little bit too strong. Whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life, so Yeah, maybe that along with the Falconwrath Noble, maybe it was a little bit too strong in that kind of archetype. Reaper of the Wilds has the built-in, can gain hexproof. Anytime another creature dies, you can scry one. I could definitely see this card being really, really strong because it's a 4 mana for a 4/5 is really solid stats. Even on the vanilla test, it's pretty good. But then on top of that, you have all these bonus perks. You can give it Death Touch. You can give it Hexproof. It can really go wild. So and then also anytime another creature dies, you can control your draws by scrying one. Bounty of the Lux over here. They took it away because I think it was just a little bit too much phrasing, too much wording on the card. With the flood counter and then removing it, and then just it's kind of wonky. I could definitely see why they removed it, but it's kind of an interesting ramp spell. Simic Sky Swallower over here, I think is kind of unfortunate that they took it away because even though it does have it is 7 mana. I definitely can see why they took it away because it's a 6/6 flying trampler, a flampler, and has Shroud. So even though you can't target it with your own spells, just the fact that it has hexproof Shroud is just really, really good, especially as a 6/6 flyer. So yeah, maybe it was just a little bit too strong in this cube. They took away Enigma Drake. Maybe they already have the Crackling Drake, so they wanted to diversify, not really have both the Drakes for the Izzet colors for that Izzet spells archetype. Mannequin over here might have been just an auto include in all the decks. So 2 mana, you can ramp out for you. Again, even though it's only colorless mana, it can help pretty much all the decks. Mire Battlesphere over here. This one 7 mana for a 4/7, but when it enters the battlefield, you create 4 1/1 artifact creature tokens. And yeah, maybe again this one was a little bit too strong for the red-black sacrifice deck, creating all those tokens along with getting a 4/7 body. Darksteel Axe, indestructible. Maybe it was a little bit too annoying to try and interact with the Darksteel Axe being indestructible for the aggressive decks. If they were to get this, they're always going to have it. Okay, so moving forth, Flare Husk might not have been that much of an impact, even though for the equipment aura archetype might have been helpful in that case. But yeah, it comes down as a living weapon 0/0 and then equips itself to become a 1/1. Guardian Idol, another mana rock, enters the battlefield tapped, but it can be used to tap into a colorless mana. Along with the Pristine Talisman, maybe they took these away because they wanted to, take away some of the mana rocks because you can throw them into any deck. Then we have a bunch of vehicles over here: Heart of Kirin, Ether Sphere Harvester, Renegade Freighter, Fleet Wheel Cruiser, and Untethered Express are all artifact vehicles, and they're all pretty strong in their own right. Essentially, you can crew any number of creatures you control with, the power, total power, in Heart of Kirin's case, 3 or more. Turn your smaller creatures and crew your vehicles, and essentially they jump into the vehicle and they can deal more damage. Like Heart of Kirin, it becomes a 4/4 flyer. As early, it's only a 2-drop, so as early as turn 3, you can turn it into a 4/4 flyer. You're maybe 1-drop and 2-drop, or maybe I don't know. I can definitely see Heart of Kirin just being too strong, turning your early game plays into a 4/4 flyer. Along with Ether Sphere Harvester and these other vehicles, I think it's just maybe they're a little bit too strong. But at the same time, there's still I think 1 or 2 vehicles. There's that pirate ship as well as that 2/3 flyer. So there's still 1 or 2 vehicles in here, but it's not as prominent. It's not having these big chunky vehicles kind of dominate the cube. I think it was kind of good to take these out just because I think they're a little bit too strong, like Heart of Kirin especially. But also these, like Renegade Freighter, it comes down as a 3 mana 4/3, and every time it attacks, it becomes essentially a 5/4 with Trample, and then Untethered Express is a 4/4 with Trample. So I can definitely see these vehicles kind of just, especially since they're colorless, you can just throw them into any deck, turn your smaller drops or your tokens into crewing bigger vehicles. So I can definitely see why they took them away. Key to the City is just another card where, maybe it was a little bit too much power, where, you discard a land and up to one target creature can't be blocked to this turn, so maybe it was a little bit too good in that sense. Again, these are all colorless, so you can jam them into any deck. There's no color restrictions. And then Haunted Plate Mail, 4 mana, 4/4, and you can pay 0 until end of turn. Haunted Plate Mail becomes a 4/4 Spirit Artifact creature that's no longer an equipment. Activate this ability only if you control no other creatures. Maybe it wasn't as useful as they thought, or yeah, it's just a 4 mana 4/4. Or maybe conversely, it was a little bit too strong, providing all of those stats, +4/+4. So, but yeah, I thought it was an interesting card, but they took it away. So, they also took away, as far as lands, they took away all of the desert cycles. So, yeah, maybe they just were very low impact. It's always useful to, later on in the game, if you draw a land and you don't need it, you can just cycle it. But at the same time, these lands do come into play tapped, and they're only monocolored. So, yeah, that's going to do it. I think, yep, that is it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's quite a long one, but hope you guys can take some lessons from this cube study. I really like the improvements that I've seen. Some of the cards that were taken out, there's some of them that I do miss, well, that I think were pretty nice for the cube, but the cube designer, whoever is doing it, probably had their own reasons for taking those cards out. I do agree with taking all those vehicles out, because I think those vehicles were a little bit too strong, turning your smaller, earlier game creatures into bigger threats, especially if you're going the tokens, go wide strategy, and especially since they're colorless, you can just jam them into any deck. So, yeah, overall, really cool products, really great cube. I think it's a perfect product. If you're just getting into cube, maybe you sold your collection and you just want to have, a nice, well-drafted, well-constructed cube for the kitchen table. This is its 7th iteration, the starter cube by Card Kingdom. So, I think it's a great place to start to learn how to cube. If you can just take some lessons from this, or if you are interested, you can purchase it off their website from the from the Card Kingdom website. So overall, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. The cube tutors are down below in the description if you want to go more into depth and see how I compared both the version 6 as well as version 7. But looking at the cube, seeing it over all of these different iterations, I definitely think it's been improved on every time. So props to the designer. And yeah, I think it's a great overall cube just for the kitchen table, especially for $100. And you're also getting those Battle for Zendikar lands, as well as some Ultra Pro sleeves for the whole kit. Overall, I think it's a great value. Even though me personally, I wouldn't pre-purchase a cube, just because I think it's a little bit more fun to go through my own journey and collect my own cards, and kind of throw the cards that I collect into my cube. But I still wanted to go more into depth about the cube, about this starter cube, see where what's considered a good starter place for a cube. And yeah, I took a lot of design principles from this, especially the black. I really like the sacrifice archetype. I think it's really flavorful. It's very, black and graveyard, sacrifice all your creatures for the bigger, demons or whatever, or for the bigger spells where you can destroy your opponent's creatures and stuff like that. I think it's really cool. So I'm gonna, take that and hopefully get some more cards that can, be sacrifice fodder, as well as, have some sacrifice outlets and payoffs, and throw that into my cube, because I think that just creates a really cool design for that color, for black. But otherwise, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. Take it easy, and yeah, I will see you in the next one.